Chapter 3:15. In the Carthage Senate, the attackers led by the Maganid family, who were strongly supported by the people, vigorously attacked the conservatives led by Hanno. Their proposal to attack Syracuse and rebuild the northern security barrier for Carthage was finally passed. Therefore, the Carthage Senate once again appointed the patriarch of the Maganid family, one of the Carthage Suffets. Similar to the consul, there were two of them, Hamilco as the commander, and began to recall the army that had just been sent to develop the Iberian Peninsula. The commander of the army was Hamilco's younger brother, Margo. At the same time, they began to prepare food for the army. A day ago, a major event happened in Grimentum. Two small tribes in the north, Lud and Burina, had a conflict over territory and even had a fight. The city governor, Bagul, personally went to mediate, but was suddenly besieged by the tribe's warriors. Bagul was caught off guard. Thanks to his bodyguards risking their lives to break through the siege, he was able to escape back to Grimentum city. Soon, the news that Bagul was seriously injured and on the verge of death came from the city. At the same time, the city gates were closed and the city was heavily guarded. However, no troops were sent to attack the two tribes that openly raised the flag of rebellion. For a time, outside the city, the tribes under the jurisdiction of Grimentum were in a state of panic, and rumors spread everywhere. The news quickly spread to Picassus and Potentia. "Son, that old fox Poimet has finally made his move. We can't wait any longer. We must immediately send troops to attack Grimentum," Sinsing said excitedly and anxiously. "Father, didn't you say that we would wait for Potentia to send troops before we send troops?" Ninath asked in confusion when he saw how excited Sinsing was. "The situation now is different from before. Although Potentia hasn't sent troops, they have already made their move. Didn't you just hear that the governor of Grimentum was ambushed and seriously injured? This must have been done by Poimet, and the others secretly instigated the Grimentum tribes adjacent to Potentia. Logically, the people of Dionia should have sent troops to carry out bloody revenge against those tribes, but the people of Dionia did not. Instead, they locked the city gate. What does this mean?" Sinsing waved his arms and said excitedly. "It means that the people of Dionia have no extra troops to suppress those rebellious tribes. Their soldiers have been transferred to attack Brudi. The messenger of Brudi, who came yesterday, was not as nervous as he was when he asked us to join the alliance. The people of Dionia have sent nearly 20,000 troops to attack Brudi from the north, but they could not reach Vag city and suffered heavy casualties. They also sent 10,000 troops to attack Napatisha from the south, but they were also blocked outside the mountains, unable to advance. Dionia is in a difficult situation of fighting with the people of Brudi, so the people of Dionia only want to defend Grimentum. Now, the tribes in Grimentum are like calves that have lost their mothers, panicking. We must rush to Grimentum's territory before Potentia does. Those tribes will definitely submit to us, and our troops will quickly grow. When Poimet arrives, it will be too late. Our Picassus has the final say in Grimentum." Sinsing could not help but laugh sinisterly when he thought of this. "Father, I'll gather the soldiers now." Ninatha's blood was boiling at his father's words. He immediately strode out of the living room. Behind him, Sinsing's voice was full of hatred. "The cunning people of Dionia dared to take away my Grimentum. The day of revenge I've been waiting for has finally come. God Asanu, I, Sinsing, will offer the blood of the Greeks as a sacrifice to you. I hope to get your blessing." "Brother, what are you hesitating for?" Boric shouted anxiously. "The people of Picassus have already made the first move. The cunning Sinsing must have roped in the tribes in Grimentum and schemed to severely injure Bagul of Dionia. Now, the army of Picassus must have set off. If we don't send our troops, the Grimentum will belong to Picassus." Compared to the hot-tempered Borit, Poimet, the great leader of Potentia, who was more than 50 years old, sat upright on a wooden chair. His eyebrows did not even twitch as he listened to Borit's words. He slowly said, "I still stand by my words, wait. Brother, if you don't want to take the risk, why don't I bring some of the soldiers to Grimentum first?" Borit was so anxious that he wanted to say more. Plomet's expression became serious. He looked at his brother and said coldly, "I'm still the one in charge of Potentia. If you want to give orders, wait until I'm dead." Borit did not dare to speak again. He and Plomet were almost 20 years apart. Their father had died early, and he was actually raised by this older brother. Therefore, although they were brothers, they were more like father and son. "Borit." Plomet's tone became gentler. "Don't forget how we lost the Grimentum." Borit did not speak, but his expression showed that he was not convinced. Plomet sighed, and his face became more solemn. "I know you've been complaining that I've been too cautious all these years. I didn't intervene in Lucania's internal disputes, let Aesopyrus grow, and now I'm not willing to lay my hands on the Grimentum. But you have to know that Potentia is different from Picassus and the Grimentum. They're surrounded by Lucanians, and to the north of us, there are the terrifying Simonians. Don't forget what our ancestors always told us: we were driven from the north to this mountain area by these Simonians. Don't look at the fact that these Simonians haven't fought with us yet. That's because we have enough warriors, and they still have to deal with the Greeks in the west, so we're safe. But if we're weak, do you think those hungry wolves will let Potentia go?" Borit's expression changed slightly. "At the beginning of the year, I couldn't resist your repeated requests to send troops to the Grimentum. In the end, you and the warriors were captured by the Dionia. Do you know? During that time, the Simonians sent an envoy to me, expressing their willingness to lend me troops to defeat the Dionia?" This time Borit was moved. He could not help but ask anxiously, "There was such a thing? You agreed?" "Agreed?" Plomet sneered. "If I agreed, Potentia would have belonged to the Simonians long ago. Fortunately, we made peace with Dionia in time and released you. Only then did I heave a sigh of relief. Now, the situation in the Grimentum is complicated. I don't know how the war between Dionia and the Brudi will turn out. I can't see clearly. If you can't see clearly, don't send troops easily. If Sinsing wants to snatch the Grimentum, then let him snatch it. The Dionia are not easy to deal with." After listening, Borit was silent for a while. He asked with some reluctance, "If that's the case, why did you agree to form an alliance with the Brudi, big brother?" Plomet's turbid eyes flashed with a glimmer of light. "Forming an alliance is also to have another way out. Asanu, bless us, if a good opportunity appears. So we have to calm down and wait slowly." Pinelin urged his horse back to Cosenza at top speed, just in time to intercept Nicaru, who was rushing back from Canopetia with his troops. It was not easy to persuade him to stay in Cosenza and wait for the army to gather before attacking Abyssinia together. But not long after, he received a report from a cavalry scout. The Greeks were building a fortress on the road from Abyssinia to the plateau. Pinelin could no longer sit still. If the Greeks were to build the fortress, it would undoubtedly make it more difficult to recapture Abyssinia. He had to let Nicaru lead his soldiers to stop them, and added 1,000 warriors from other tribes for him. He also repeatedly told him not to fight the Greeks head-on. After 3 hours of anxiously leading his troops, Nicaru could vaguely see the Greeks in front of him. His eyes widened. They had turned the exit of the mountain road into a large construction site, digging pits, piling, moving wood. It was a bustling scene, and a 3-meter-high, 10-meter-long wooden wall stood there. There were gates, battlements, trenches, antlers, and all the basic facilities that a fortress should have. Nicaru moved quickly, but it had been a day and a half since the 2nd Legion occupied Abyssinia. Legion Commander Dracos seized the opportunity and divided his 7,000 soldiers into 3 teams, taking turns to build the fortress day and night. The soldiers also knew that time was tight, so they worked hard. coupled with some simple defensive facilities that had been assembled by the engineering operation, the fortress had already taken shape when Niku arrived. As soon as the scouts spotted the British troops, they rushed back to report the news. A bugle was blown in the fortress, and the laboring soldiers retreated at a steady pace. Although Niku was surprised by the speed at which the Dionia soldiers built the fortress, it took Abyssinia 7 or 8 days to remove the fortress facing Cosenza. He was more angry that the Greeks were doing whatever they wanted in his territory. "Kill those Greeks outside the city." At his command, the bugle sounded. His soldiers hated the enemy for taking away their homeland, and like ferocious wolves, they rushed towards the unarmed and unarmed Dionia soldiers. Under the command of the team officer, the Dionia soldiers did not panic. They passed through the gate in an orderly manner and retreated into the wall. The soldiers at the back even turned their heads to look back, hoping for something good to happen. Chapter 3:16. Last year, the Vergs had already suffered, but Sidorum did not tell the other Brudi about their painful experience. "There's a trap in front." The momentum of the Brudi's charge suddenly stopped. Just when they stopped moving, Dracos on the wooden wall ordered, "Archers, get ready!" Bagalipi, who was next to him, quickly shouted, "General, please don't attack first. They are the warriors of Abyssinia, let me try to persuade them to surrender." The Second Legion had received reinforcements from Turii, and its strength had increased to 9,000 soldiers. However, 1/3 of the soldiers stayed behind in Abyssinia to prevent any unrest. At the same time, Dracos invited Bagalipi to go to the fortress that was being built. On the surface, it was to help the soldiers of the Second Legion to familiarize themselves with the terrain, so that when the Brudi arrived, they could better understand the attacking enemy. In fact, it was to transfer the most influential leader in Ciudad Abyssinia to ensure the safety of the newly occupied city. Who would have thought that this leader would have such an unexpected effect? Dracos looked at the anxious Bagalipi, hesitated for a moment, and nodded. Bagalipi held the entrance of the fortress with both hands and shouted with all his strength, "People of Abyssinia, I'm Bagalipi. Although Ciudad Abyssinia has changed owners, your families are safe. Your parents, wives, and children are looking forward to your safe return. Go home, people of Abyssinia. The people of Dionia will not hurt you, and they will accept you as citizens of Dionia. Go home, your families are waiting for you at home." The Brudi's warriors, who were supporting their companions and advancing carefully within 50 meters of the city, could clearly hear the affectionate shouts in Brudi language coming from the wall. Its leader Bagalipi's voice. To the people of Abyssinia, this voice was very familiar. Because Bagalipi had always been respected by the people of Abyssinia, the screams of the injured soldiers gradually became softer. The soldiers who came to the rescue also forgot to help. They listened carefully and began to whisper to each other. Niku, who was at the back, knew about the situation and flew into a rage. "Bagalipi, you damned old man! Why didn't I realize he was so vicious before? It was him. He must have betrayed us. That's why I let the Dionia occupy my city. I'll skin him alive. Eat his flesh. Kill his entire family." Niku could only curse. No matter how irascible he was, he knew that with the current condition of the soldiers, they could no longer fight. He could only order a temporary retreat. However, when the horn was blown, a small number of soldiers lingered around. Niku was anxious and angry. He hurriedly sent warriors from other tribes to drive them away with spears. It was not easy for them to withdraw from the battlefield, and it almost led to a conflict. Niku did not dare to stay any longer and quickly retreated a few miles. The soldiers supported each other and sighed along the way. One could imagine the low morale of the soldiers. Dracos saw the situation on the wooden wall but did not take the opportunity to attack. This was because Bagalipi gave him a better idea. The people of Dionia had turned the area 50 meters outside the wooden wall into a trap, and his own Abyssinia warriors were distracted by Bagalipi's words. Nikaru was now at a loss of what to do. He ordered to set up camp here and sent scouts to report the situation of the enemy to Cosenza. Nikaru thought about it again and decided to summon the leaders of the warriors of Abyssinia. He asked them to emphasize to the soldiers that they should not believe the rumors of traitors. Their families had already become slaves of the Greek. Only by fighting to recapture Ciudad Abyssinia could they regain their freedom. Just as he was shouting at his men to go back and boost the morale of the soldiers, the guards came in and reported that a group of Abyssinia women had arrived in the barrack. It turned out that Bagalipi had gathered some wives of Nikaru's soldiers. These women belonged to the category of old and young, and it was impossible for them to not return. He then told them that their husbands were outside. If you do not want them to die in battle, you have to go and call them back. Under the guidance of the Dionia soldiers, these women walked out of the trap and trekked for a few miles to arrive at Nikaru's barrack. When the soldiers guarding the barracks saw that they were their relatives, they did not stop them. Instead, they opened the fence and welcomed them. As a result, touching scenes of the husband and wife meeting each other with tears in their eyes soon appeared. These women would tell their husbands that after the Dionia soldiers occupied the whole city, they did not harm any Abyssinia people. They also sent doctors to rescue those who were injured, put out the burning fires, and repaired the damaged houses. Now, order in the city was gradually restored. A small number of Abyssinia soldiers cried when they learned from the women that their families had died in battle. In one of the barracks, all the soldiers gathered in one place. The scene of joy and sorrow was lively and a little funny. But for Nikaru, who had just received the news, he was terrified. This was a conspiracy by the Dionia people. In a moment of desperation, Nikaru actually sent out his guards in an attempt to separate the women from the soldiers. He wanted to prevent the situation from escalating, but he did not expect that his action would intensify the conflict. Looking at the women who were forcibly dragged away, some who fell to the ground because they resisted, but the guards did not care and dragged them away. The Abyssinia soldiers were furious. They surrounded the guards who came from Nikaru's tribe and were made up of his most trusted tribesmen. These guards, who usually relied on Nikaru's power and tyrannical power, knelt and begged for mercy when they saw the situation was not good. However, the angry soldiers ignored their pleas and rushed forward to beat them up. Gradually, there were guards who died under the punches and kicks of countless people. When the soldiers found out, they were so frightened that they stopped beating. The guards' dying cries suddenly frightened some of the soldiers. The tyrannical power of Nikaru over the years began to envelop their hearts. We killed Nikaru's tribesmen. He will not forgive us. Why don't we take advantage of the fact that there are so many people now and capture him, then we will go home. At this moment, a young Abyssinia shouted loudly, and immediately became the direction of the confused soldiers. In for a penny, in for a pound, in for a pound. They gathered and rushed towards Nikaru's tent. Nikaru had already received the terrible news. At this moment, there was no time for him to regret. He hurriedly rode on a horse and fled to the area where the warriors of the other tribes lived. He also asked them to immediately send troops to quell the rebellion, but was rejected. With only 1,000 warriors to fight against more than 2,000 angry Abyssinia warriors, and the one who gave the order was not their own leader. How could they listen to the orders of the alliance elder Nikaru, who was already alone? Therefore, when the Abyssinia warriors approached the camp, Nikaru felt the danger and rode away again. Facing the warriors of the other tribes who were ready for battle, the people of Abyssinia who gradually calmed down were afraid that Nikaru would lead troops to retaliate, so they took the initiative to retreat. Do as Chief Bagalipi said, return to Abyssinia. When the confused Abyssinia people were wondering where they should go next, it was the young warrior who shouted loudly again. In fact, this was the only way for them now. Outside the newly built fortress of the Dionia soldiers, Bagalipi led a few famous elders of Abyssinia to welcome the group of restless warriors. Dracos did not expect Bagalipi's founding to be so successful. It made him excited and a little distressed. How to deal with the more than 2,000 returning Abyssinia warriors was a big problem. If he simply let them all go back to the city, even Dracos himself would not feel at ease. Fortunately, this time the attack of the enemy was successfully stopped without using weapons, which bought him time again. Now, he was eager for the army led by the Devers to arrive as soon as possible. Sinsing decided to lead 6,000 Picassus warriors to Grimentum together with his son Ninath. Just as he expected, as soon as the army arrived, the tribes in the northern region of Grimentum came to join them, including the 2 tribes that had ambushed Bagul, Lud and Burina. Sinsing had learned his lesson from the past, and treated all the tribes that came to seek refuge with him warmly. He quickly won over the hearts of the leaders of these panic-stricken small tribes, and also allowed his army to quickly swell to over 10,000 people. They continued to march south in a grandiose manner. When the news reached the city hall of Grimentum, Bagul, who was rumored to be seriously injured, was sitting on a wooden chair, looking slightly worried. Although we spread the rumors that Dionia and Brudi are at a disadvantage, and I'm seriously injured to confuse the enemy, I did not expect these tribes in the north to join Picassus so quickly. Sigh. All the efforts we've made before are in vain. Assist sneered. Just like what Sir Devers said, only in the face of danger can we see which tribes are truly loyal to Dionia, and which ones are the traitors. For the past 6 months, most of our energy has been spent on mediating the territorial and property disputes of these tribes. They are all wolves that can't be fed. Now, except for the few tribes that have been arranged, we can wipe out the other tribes that have betrayed us and completely bring the territory of Grimentum under our control. They are all Lucanians. Bagul knew that what Assist said was reasonable, but he could not help but sigh again. Chapter 317. Bagul listened to his brother-in-law's words, and his expression gradually became firm. He said loudly, "You're right. I'm a Lucanian, but I'm also a citizen of Dionia. We can't let go of this great opportunity to unify Lucania. Big brother, there's a problem now." Seeing that Bagul's thoughts were clear, Assists immediately asked, "Picassus's strength is growing too fast. Do you think we need to reinforce Saima's tribe? If we don't do anything, that cunning Sinsing will believe that we're in trouble." After Bagul got rid of his doubts, he was already fully focused on the upcoming battle. As the actual commander of the Legio III Grimentum, his decisiveness and determination were on display. Moreover, the tribes in the south have already received our notice in advance and are already prepared. Now everything is ready, and we're just waiting for Legion Commander Hieronymus and Lazaru to arrive with their troop. I believe that Lazaru is eagerly looking forward to using a great victory to wash away the humiliation he suffered in the Isthmian tournament. Although Assists was also looking forward to the battle, as Bagul's assistant, he was instructed by the Devers to assist Bagul in organizing and completing the Grimentum's battle plan. Therefore, he had to consider the problem more carefully in order to help the straightforward Bagul find any loopholes. There's still no movement from Potentia. Is there a problem? Don't worry, the people of Potentia are already frightened by their previous failure. They have to defend against the Simonians, and they can't afford to lose too much. Moreover, as far as I know, their great leader, Pwamath, is a very steady person. I'm afraid that by the time he wants to act, we'll already be attacking Picassus. Bagul smiled confidently. When Nikaru fled back to Cosenza, Penlan was shocked. After listening to Nikaru's story, he was shocked and regretful. The news that the Dionia's fortress was built so quickly shocked him. He knew that the Dionia had captured Abyssinia, but he still sent the Abyssinia warriors to attack it. It was a stupid move that he made in a moment of desperation. Under the situation where the British soldiers were in short supply, more than 2,000 elite soldiers were destroyed just like that. It was really distressing. although Nikaru assured him that as long as he went to the front lines and shouted, these Abyssinia soldiers would not immediately change sides, but they would not have the heart to fight. Penland did not intend to fully believe his words. This grumpy and reckless leader of Abyssinia did not know how to win people's hearts at all. The rebellion of the Abyssinia soldiers also had a lot to do with him. At this time, Penland could only suppress his anxiety. He ordered the other tribes to send as many warriors as possible while waiting for the arrival of the army led by Petaru. At dusk, not only did Petaru arrive with his army, but the great leader of Ambania, Bergam, also arrived with his army. Only then did Penland's heart calm down a little. Early the next morning, Penland, Petaru, Bergam, and Nikaru led 11,000 Kazensa warriors, 2,500 Ambanian warriors, and 5,000 warriors of other races, a total of nearly 20,000 people and 2,000 slaves, to the east. Great leader, bad news. The enemy is about to attack the city. Hearing the report from his subordinates, Panjuru was not too nervous. After Nikaru and Bergam left with their troops, the Dionia did not appear for 2 consecutive days. This made him start to believe what Bergam said. Canopetia was not the focus of the Dionia's attack. What are you panicking about? It's not like the Dionia did not attack before. Didn't we easily repel them? Don't worry, with the sturdiness of Canopetia's walls, the Dionia can't do anything to us. Panjuru encouraged his subordinates. But the Dionia's attack this time is a little different. They are digging. When Panjuru rushed to the city wall, the soldiers of the Dionia Legio IV had already paved the slope 100 meters away from the city wall with soil and stones, creating a flat ground about 20 meters in length. Then, Panjuru saw the Dionia put a wooden shelf about the height of a person on top of it. The Briti warriors were curious and guessed what it was. Many of them thought that it was a tool that the Greeks used to offer sacrifices to their god. Panjuru stared ahead, watching the enemy carry wooden boxes to the side of the wooden shelf with difficulty. The uneasiness in his heart gradually increased. Are you ready? Can we fire? Helos came to the front of the ballista team, which the Devers called ballista team, and asked the ballista captain, wearing a red crown, expectantly. The ballista captain replied embarrassedly, "We still need an observer to position the ballista." The observer was an apprentice from the Mathematics Research Institute established by the Devers. He was standing in front of the captain. After hearing Helos's question, he turned around and said in a gentle tone, "Yes, but we have to try firing first." He pointed to the city wall in front of him and added, "Although this place is about 100 meters away from the city wall, the terrain of Canopetia is a bit higher. It is not on the same plane as the ballista, so it is difficult to determine the landing point. I need to see the test results before I make the correction." The captain nodded to show that he understood. Helos was a little confused. He knew that he could not learn all kinds of knowledge as easily as the Devers and get along with those knowledgeable scholars. He did not understand, but he knew that since this observer was selected by the Devers from the Mathematics Research Institute, he must be capable. "Place the elevation lever in the middle and pull the bowstring to the maximum," the observer said. Immediately, the captain loudly ordered all the ballista gunners. The ballista gunners immediately turned the multiple sets of pulleys at the end of the ballista, and the iron hooks began to pull the finger-thick bowstring outward. This was an improvement on the Syracuse ballista by Maticles after he achieved some results in the research of pulleys. It made it easier for the gunners to pull the bowstring. As the bowstring moved further and further back, it drove the 2 wooden ballista arms fixed to the iron main beam by the torsion spring group to move back as well. Not only did the 2 ballista gunners feel a little tired, but even the torsion spring group connected to the main beam made a creaking sound. The ballista arms even showed a slight bend. The bowstring was pulled to the last position of the guide rail, and the ballista gunners hurriedly stuck the rotating shaft of the pulley. "Prepare the ballista," the captain ordered. The ballista gunners took out a stone bullet the size of 2 fists from the wooden box next to them. The stone was made from Devers cement, mixed with gravel, solidified in a circular mold, and polished by slaves, so its shape was round and smooth. They placed it on the woven net bag in the middle of the bowstring. Fire! At the captain's command, the ballista gunners pressed down on the spring. 2 thick strands of ox tendon tightly twisted together to form a spring group, which drove the pulled ballista arm to spring back suddenly. The huge force generated by the torsion force drove the bowstring, and the bowstring drove the stone bullet forward on the smooth guide rail at lightning speed, and then passed through the circular hole in the middle of the main beam. Under the gaze of Helos, the stone bullet flew out, and in the blink of an eye, it became a small black dot in the air. In Panjaru's vision, the small dot in the air rapidly grew larger. Amidst the screams of the soldiers, it flew over the city wall and fell into the city, smashing through the roof of a house, causing a cry of alarm. The soldiers were discussing what it was in a panic. Panjaru's face was gloomy. There was no doubt that this was Dionia's new siege weapon, but why didn't they use it before, but only after Nikaru and Bergam left? Could it be that all this was planned in advance? The elevation angle is high, the shooting distance is about 300 meters. The gunner made a rough judgment after observing the trajectory of the stone bullet. He carefully looked at the comparison table of elevation angle, torsion force scale, and range, which was drawn by the Institute of Mathematics according to the newly researched parabolic equation, and then said, "Put the elevation bar forward, pull the bowstring to the maximum, and fire another shot." The captain gave the order, and while the ballista gunners were busy, the gunner said to Helos, "According to our research, the middle and upper sections of the city wall are generally weaker. We should try to focus our ballista bombardment on this area of the city wall." Helos listened attentively and nodded. The stone bullet flew out again, and this time, it accurately hit the city wall. With a loud bang, gravel flew everywhere, and the screams of the enemy could be clearly heard from 100 meters away. The gunner and the captain were obviously satisfied with the bombardment this time, so they continued to order, "All ballista cannons fire according to the previous settings." More than a dozen stone bullets flew out one after another, exploding on the enemy's city wall. "Continue firing, don't stop." Helos was obviously also very satisfied with the power of the ballista, but he did not completely rely on this secret weapon. He had another plan. "Order the soldiers to start building the causeway." The orderly obeyed the order and left. Helos turned to Cypros, who had been following behind him, and said, "Lord Cypros, I hope that your men can also participate in the siege." "Don't be so polite, Commander Helos, please give the order," Cypros said humbly. His eyes did not stray from the stone projectiles whistling through the air. The roar of the projectiles shocked him to the core. With the siege weapons invented by the Dionians and the 4-meter-high engineering towers being built in the camp, which city walls could withstand the attack of the Dionians? Even if the Greeks lost the battle, as long as they hid in the city, they would be able to withstand the attacks of the powerful enemies. Would this be the end of the era when the Greeks were defeated? Chapter 3:18. Everyone, Cosenza's army has entered the Briti barracks 2 miles away. According to the scouts, the number of enemies may be more than 20,000. Dracos said to the crowd. Not only was he not nervous when he received the enemy's report, but he was relieved. It turned out that 2,000 Abyssinia warriors had voluntarily surrendered, and Dracos was having a headache on how to arrange them. Bagalipi suggested that Nikaru would soon lead Cosenza's army back for revenge. Other than a few wounded warriors who could return to Ciudad Abyssinia to recuperate, the others had to stay in the newly built fortress and assist the Dionia in defending against Nikaru's attack. To prevent Dracos from suspecting that he had too much military power, Bagalipi suggested that the warriors of each tribe should be led by the leaders of each tribe. Dracos was very grateful for Bagalipi's understanding, but after all, the battle between Dionia and Abyssinia had just ended. Some of the families of Abyssinia warriors had also died in the hands of Dionia's soldiers. The hatred between the two tribes could not be eliminated so quickly. In the small fortress, conflicts between the soldiers of both sides were inevitable. Dracos and Bagalipi were very worried about this. Dracos, who was not good at dealing with such matters, could not wait to divert the attention of the soldiers to defending against the enemy's attack. After Dracos finished speaking, Adepagus translated his words into British language. The captains were all eager to try. Although Krilu was nervous, he knew that he had to assist the Dionia to block the attack of the British coalition. Otherwise, if the enemy attacked, the first person Nikru would kill would be him. Bagalipi sat still, but his thoughts were similar to the young Krilu. Only Brim covered his abdomen that was stabbed by a Dionia soldier with one hand and wrapped tightly with a cloth by the doctor. He waved his other hand and exclaimed in shock, 20,000 Cosenza soldiers. Does Cosenza have so many warriors now? I think Pinland should have also gathered the warriors of the Ambanians and other tribes, Bagalipi said. Brim's shock subsided a little, but he still sighed. 20,000 soldiers. This is the strongest army Brudi has ever had. This is nothing. There are many city-state armies of more than 20,000 soldiers that have been defeated by Dionia. Crotone in the south. The Masapi and Puchetti across the bay. We're not afraid of having too many enemies, but we're afraid of having too few enemies. Trotyras stood up and said passionately. This son-in-law of One Arm Antichorus was only a squad leader when he first arrived in Turii with the mercenaries. Now, he was the leader of a battalion that commanded 1,000 people. His words were met with unanimous agreement from the other battalion leaders. Brim was unconvinced and wanted to say more, but Bagalipi held him down. Seeing this, the first battalion leader, Adrianx, looked at Drax and realized that the legion leader did not seem to have any intention of saying anything. He knew his old friend's temperament well, so he came out to smooth things over. Although Cosenza's troops are large, we also have tens of thousands of soldiers, and we have the fortress as a barrier. According to Sir Devers, if the attacking side does not have a force several times that of the defending side, it will be very difficult to take down the fortress. Not to mention that the army led by Sir Devers will be arriving soon. Evidently, the fame of Sir Devers had made Brim lose the desire to refute. At this moment, when the hall regained its silence, Dracos began to speak. Kspit, how's the training of the 2,000 newly arrived Dionia freedmen that I've assigned to you? Kspit said with satisfaction. The freedmen sent by the Senate seem to have gone through strict selection. They've all gone through many military training sessions, and they're better at obeying orders. Archery and javelin throwing are their forte, and they can hold their ground for a while in close combat. I've already organized them into teams, and they're fully capable of playing a role in defending the city. That's good. Although Dracos was satisfied, there was not a trace of a smile on his face. He continued with a solemn expression, given that the newly built wooden walkways are narrow and can't accommodate too many soldiers, we'll fight when the enemy attacks. You'll lead the light infantry brigade and the 2,000 freedmen on the wooden walls and launch continuous long-range attacks against the attacking enemy. When the enemy approaches the bottom of the wall, you'll immediately command them to retreat to the bottom of the wall. Let the archers continue to shoot and kill the enemy, disrupting their rhythm of attack. Don't worry, Commander. Hades will protect my brigade. I'm afraid that before it's your turn to go into battle, the enemy will be repelled by my brothers, Kspit said confidently. Dracos was happy to see such fighting spirit in his subordinates, but he would not praise and encourage them like Sir Devers, or even joke around to liven up the atmosphere. He only nodded slightly and did not respond. He looked around at the other brigade leaders and continued to explain his battle plan. After Kspit's troops retreat to the bottom of the wall, the 1st and 2nd Brigades and the Abyssinia warriors will quickly go up the wall. The 1st and 2nd Brigades will guard the southern wooden wall, while the Abyssinia warriors will guard the northern wall. Do not leave any gaps for the enemy to attack. The 3rd and 4th Brigades will act as the reserve force and wait at the bottom of the wall. Once there's any danger, immediately go to support. The 5th and 6th Brigades will stay behind to guard Ciudad Abyssinia. Everyone, do you understand your mission? Understood. Brutus above, we Abyssinia warriors will not let a single Cosenza man climb the wooden wall. The young patriot Grimm was the first to respond. He also represented Bagalipi and the Silent Brim to make a promise to Dracos. Commander, this is not fair. The 5th and 6th Brigades also want to go to the fortress to kill the enemy. The 6th Brigade leader, Trotyras, cried out. Although the 5th Brigade leader did not say anything, the disappointed expression on his face said it all. Dracos did not hesitate and said firmly, "This is an order." But Trotyras wanted to refute but was interrupted by Adrianx. Trotyras, you have to understand that Ciudad Abyssinia is very important to us. If the Cosenza people break through the fortress, the Ciudad Abyssinia that you guys are guarding will be the last line of defense to stop the enemy from sealing off the mountain area. It will also be the forward base to welcome the army led by Sir Devers. In order to remind him, Adrianx did not hesitate to jinx. Trotyras was just impulsive. He was not a fool. He immediately understood the meaning behind Adrianx's words. If Ciudad Abyssinia did not have the Dionia soldiers as witnesses, in case of a reversal, Legio III's retreat route would be cut off. Not only would they be in great danger, but the attack plan formulated by Sir Devers would also completely fail. I accept the order. Trotyras immediately replied. Woo! Woo! The sound of the British horn came from afar. Xpit held onto the opening of the wooden wall and looked out. He saw that the yellow-green grass in front of him was covered by a dense number of enemies, like a black tide rushing towards the wall. It should be said that the British formation was relatively neat and compact, unlike the loose formation of the Lucanians. 200 meters away from the fortress, the British people stopped moving forward. Drive the slaves up and fill those traps for me, Penlin ordered expressionlessly. 2,000 slaves, mainly Greeks, had been plundered by the Briti tribes over the years. Under the threat of the spears of the warriors, they carried sacks filled with soil to the front of the battle formation and began to walk forward in a trembling manner. Captain, they have entered the trap area. The soldier next to Xpit reminded him in a slightly anxious tone. Xpit looked at him, smiled, and said, "You are a new recruit, right? Don't worry, let more enemies enter the shooting range." A slave dropped the sack on his back, turned around, and ran away. Another slave then threw the sack at the gap next to him. One after another, the scene was tense and a little chaotic. Sometimes, a slave accidentally stepped into a trap and let out a shrill scream, prompting the slaves to throw the sacks even more nervously. However, the supervising Briti warriors didn't just lash the slaves with leather whips, they would stab the more serious ones to death with spears. Faced with the threat of death, the slaves did not dare to be lazy. They obediently ran to the back of the formation, then carried the sacks and continued to pave the road. "Archers, get ready!" Xpit felt that the time was right and raised his right arm. More than 500 archers of the 7th Battalion and 2,000 freedmen stood on the 4-meter-high wooden wall, pulling their bows and arrows one after another. 80 meters, it was within the range of the arrows. After Xpit silently chanted the Hades anthem, he waved his right hand down forcefully, "Release! Woo! Woo! Woo!" With the continuous sound of bowstrings, more than 2,000 sharp arrows soared into the sky, whistled down in an instant, and scattered evenly among the slaves. Suddenly there was a splash of blood, and the screams continued. Seeing this scene, Penlin could not help but be moved. It was not because of the casualties of the slaves, but because he did not expect that the Dionia had so many archers, and judging from the landing point of the arrows, the archers' skills were not bad. Could it be that the Dionysian army here was not a patchwork, but a main force of the enemy? After all, the people of Abyssinia who fled to Cosenza told him that there were not too many enemies attacking Ciudad Abyssinia, no more than 1,000 people. In the narration of Nicaru, who fled to Cosenza yesterday, the number of enemies increased by 2,000. This information gave him considerable confidence in retaking Ciudad Abyssinia. However, when he came here, the initial scale of the fortress had already surprised him, and a round of arrows from the Dionia made him vigilant again. Great leader, the enemy has a lot of archers. Petru was obviously aware of this, and said with some concern. Pinlan maintained a calm expression. Let these Greek slaves continue to exhaust the archers of the Dionia, even if they all die. Chapter 319. 80 meters. 70 meters. 60 meters. The closer they were to the wooden wall, the more intense the attacks were. The number of slaves was decreasing, and most of them were already lying on the grass as stepping stones. The fear of death made a few slaves throw away their sacks and run forward with all their might. Sharp wooden stakes and meat hooks pierced into their legs, causing them to bleed profusely. They screamed in agony, but they refused to stop staggering forward. "Ah! I'm a Greek! I'm a Greek! I'm a Greek!" The soldiers on the wall were stunned by the heart-wrenching screams. They all looked at Kspit with pleading eyes. Seeing this, Kspit was also a little hesitant. At this moment, a dozen Briti warriors rushed out of the formation after receiving the order from their leader. They stepped on the sacks on the ground and threw javelins at the slaves who couldn't move forward because of the deer barricade. The screams of the Greek slaves before they died made Kspit make up his mind. He shouted angrily, "Continue to shoot." Countless arrows with sadness and anger continued to fall. Finally, almost all the slaves and Briti that were left in the shooting range were wiped out. Although these slaves were almost naked and had no protection, 2,000 of them were killed and injured in the trap area in a short time. They did not even reach the trench in front of the wooden wall. This made the leaders of the Briti gasp in horror. "Leader Pinlan, what do you think?" Bergam looked at Pinlan hesitantly. "Send other tribal warriors to continue to fill up the trap. We're almost at the foot of the wall," Pinlan said coldly but firmly. He had already come this far. No matter what, he had to test the strength of the enemy. He wouldn't back down so easily. Thousands of Briti warriors formed groups of 2. They held a shield in one hand and a sack in the other. They began to move towards the wall in a very loose formation. Kspit hoped that the enemy would slow down a little so that his soldiers could have more time to recover from the numbness in their arms. "Release the arrows." He waved his arm again. The Briti warriors were obviously more experienced than the slave. When they saw the sky full of arrows, they immediately stopped moving forward. They crouched down, huddled together, and used their shields to protect their bodies. The arrows rained down like raindrops, and a series of bang, bang, puff, puff. Amidst the crashing sounds, the screams of the soldiers were clearly much softer than before. However, when they were about 30 meters away from the wall, they were stopped in their tracks by the buckler barrier. Not only were there archers on the wooden wall, there were javelin throwers as well. For a moment, javelins and arrows rained down on the British soldiers, increasing their casualties and forcing them to retreat. "Great leader!" This time, even Petru couldn't hold himself back. "Attack again!" Pinlan hardened his heart and ordered, "Elder Petru, lead 4,000 warriors and attack the north wall. Elder Bergam, you attack the south. Elder Nicaru, you take the middle road. Don't rush, follow the previous plan. First, clear the obstacles on the road, fill up the trenches, and then attack." The soldiers on the wooden wall cheered for the British defeat, but not long after, the enemy's attack came again. This time, they were divided into small groups of a few dozen people. They were densely packed together, and at the front, there were wooden shields as big as doors. The road that extended from the city gate was the only one that didn't have trap. It was reserved for Legio III. At this time, there were also Briti warriors pushing a wooden cart full of sacks that were full of soil towards the city gate. The experienced Sipit knew that blindly shooting arrows when the enemy was heavily guarded would only waste arrows and stamina, and the results wouldn't be great. Therefore, he forbade the soldiers from shooting blindly. They would only shoot when the enemy left the wooden shields. However, the wooden carts in the middle road were the focus of Dionia's light infantry. The distance of 100 meters made the Briti warriors pushing the carts lie on the ground. However, Nikaru's angry roar urged the Briti warriors to push the carts forward. Finally, they reached the trenches with great difficulty and prepared to dump the sacks that were piled up on the carts into the trenches. Oil tanks! Spit shouted calmly. More than 10 soldiers raised the olive oil tanks that were temporarily collected from Ciudad Abyssinia and threw them accurately at the wooden carts in front of the trenches. The tanks broke and oil splashed everywhere. Soon, the wooden carts were turned into oil carts. Fire arrows! Spit ordered as he personally shot out a fire arrow. 5 to 6 fire arrows hit the wooden cart, and it quickly burst into flames. The Briti warriors that were pushing the carts were also caught on fire. They were rolling on the ground in panic. Idiot! Quick! Push it down! Push it down! Nikaru saw that the situation was urgent. He roared and threw away his shield. Risking being hit by the arrows, he pushed the hesitant warriors in front of him and rushed forward. He did not care about the burning carts. He held the carts tightly with both hands and pushed forward with all his strength. Briti warriors also rushed to his side under his command. The wooden carts were burning, and the javelins and arrows were concentrated on the carts. Under the leadership of Nikaru, the Briti warriors pushed the carts with all their might. With a boom, the entire wooden carts fell into the trenches. The sacks inside the carts filled up half of the trenches and pressed down on the crisscrossing wooden stakes in the trenches. The Briti warriors could step on the sacks in the trenches and reach the other side of the trenches in one big step. When the warriors were celebrating their success, Nikaru had already been hit by 2 javelins and was lying in a pool of blood. Nikaru was dead. When Pinlan heard this news, he could not help but feel sad. Although his relationship with Nikaru was not very good, he was still very close to Nikaru. At this time, the Briti warriors had already reached the edge of the trenches after paying a heavy price. They started to throw the sacks into the trenches. Pinlan finally gave the order, "Attack the city." The 10,000 warriors were divided into 2 groups. They carried long ladders and wooden stakes and started to approach the city wall. Just when the Briti warriors blew the horn to attack, the Dionia warriors also blew the horn. The soldiers of the 1st and 2nd companies started to go up the city wall. While the Dionia soldiers were changing shifts on the city wall, the Briti warriors stepped on the corpses of their comrades and rushed to the trenches. The Legion 3 soldiers immediately threw a rain of javelins. The Briti warriors who were hit directly fell into the trenches. When the Briti warriors reached the wooden wall, they looked up and complained. It was built by the Dionia people. Below the wooden wall, there were countless sharp wooden stakes that extended outwards, making it impossible for the ladders to reach the wall. Even if the warriors climbed to the top of the ladders, they were still a short distance away from the wooden wall. This undoubtedly increased the difficulty of attacking the city. Just when the Briti warrior was distracted, a stone fell vertically and hit him in the head. "Good job!" Krelu patted the Abyssinia warrior and shouted, "My people, kill them all! Don't let a single Kazensa person go back alive!" The battle was intense. The Dionia and Abyssinia warriors threw javelins, threw stones, stabbed with spears, pushed with tridents, and slashed with sabers. They did everything they could to stop the Briti from attacking the city. On the other hand, the Briti also used wooden stakes to attack the city wall. Under the cover of the Briti javelin throwers, a group of more than a dozen warriors carried huge logs. They not only hit the city gate but also the wooden wall. This was because Pinlan and the others thought that even though the Dionia people had built the wooden wall in such a short time, it couldn't be very sturdy. In fact, this was indeed the case. The wooden wall built by the Dionia soldiers was a double-layered wooden fence. The middle was filled with soil taken out from the trenches, and the top was covered with wooden planks to form a walkway. However, due to the lack of time, the soil in the middle was not completely compacted, and the wooden fence was not carefully reinforced. After discovering the enemy's intentions, Dracos had no choice but to divert some of his forces to attack the daring warriors who lacked protection. However, Pienluen did not only have these two methods to attack the city. "Captain, look! There's a fire!" a soldier shouted to remind Adriank. He hurriedly looked down and saw that the bottom of the wooden wall was already on fire. A few broody warriors were holding a clay pot and pouring oil on the wall. The fire was getting bigger and bigger. "Quick, shoot that man!" While Adrianx ordered the soldiers to throw the javelins, he also shouted anxiously, "Quick, pour the sand down! Pour it down!" Due to the lack of time and resources, the wooden wall was not fireproof. For example, painting. Fortunately, Dracos had considered this problem when he was discussing with the captains about how to defend the fortress. He placed cloth bags filled with soil on the walkway. The fire was finally extinguished, but Adrianx's expression was still serious. He reminded the captains and soldiers to pay close attention to any enemies who were carrying clay pots and bags of oil. They should do everything they could to prevent them from getting close to the wooden wall. The siege was bloody and cruel. Every time he saw the long ladder being pushed down and the soldiers falling from the top of the wall, Pienluen's heart ached. However, as the commander of the army, he had to pay attention to the progress of the battle. He moved forward again and again just to see more clearly. In the end, he walked to the edge of the trap area. Perhaps the corpses on the ground made the war horse feel uneasy. It snorted and used its front hooves to dig at the ground. Pienluen didn't expect the Dionians to be able to set up such a complete defensive system in just 3 days. Furthermore, the soldiers were experienced and skilled in defending the fortress. Seeing the broody warriors struggling and groaning under the wall, Pienluen's confidence gradually weakened. Chapter 320. Fortunately, behind the wooden wall, there was a guard tower that was over a meter taller than the wall. Below the wall, the light infantry led by Kspit, as well as the arrows and javelins fired by the freedmen as support. Thus, the southern section of the wooden wall was basically safe. Kspit shot an arrow, hitting the chest of the enemy who had broken through the wooden wall. The seemingly thick leather robe was completely penetrated, and the enemy collapsed to the ground. Kspit reached for the arrow out of habit, but found that the quiver was empty. "Quick, get a new quiver of arrows." Kspit shook his numb right hand and said to the guard beside him. After a while, the guard hurriedly ran back and handed him a quiver filled with 10 arrows. At the same time, he said, "Captain, the quartermaster asked you to use them sparingly. He doesn't have many arrows left. How can they be used up so quickly?" Kspit said with slight dissatisfaction. "That's what I asked him, but he said that there are more than 2,000 archers in our light infantry and freedmen, and each of them has 20,000 arrows in their quiver, but almost all of the archers have used up their quiver. He also said that arrows are bought with money, and the price is not low. This time, because our second legion has a need for defensive operations, the enemy of Mercis gave us 30,000 arrows. Otherwise, they wouldn't have let us waste them like this." The guard felt wronged as he passed on the message. Although Kspit was also a little angry, the quartermaster of the supply team was now under Mercy's command. Whenever he thought of that stingy fatty, Kspit felt a headache coming on. He said loudly, "Brothers, there's nothing to worry about even if we run out of arrows. We still have reverse blades and spears, don't you think?" "Yes." The stalemate of the siege made Pienluen very anxious. He turned around to look at the soldiers resting in the rear. He hesitated whether or not he should send the last 5,000 soldiers into battle. However, the battlefield was too small, and the wooden walls were too crowded. No matter how many people they sent, it would be useless. At this moment, he heard a rumbling sound behind him, followed by a wave of cheers. The wooden wall has collapsed. The enemy's wall had collapsed. The warriors beside him cheered. Penland turned around excitedly. There was a large gap in the center of the southern part of the wooden wall of the stronghold, and the British warriors were rushing in. Don't panic. Do not panic. Brim comforted the panicking Abyssinia warriors loudly. Bagalipi was too old, and the warriors in his tribe were led by Bagalipi's nephew. Therefore, among the 3 leaders of Abyssinia, Brim was the oldest, the most senior, and the most prestigious. Although he didn't really want to fight the Cosenza people, he had to work hard for the survival of his people on the battlefield. Guard your position well. The wall will not collapse again, Brim shouted. He knew very well that it was because of the carelessness of the soldiers that the wooden wall had been burned by the kerosene and hit by the black wood, which caused the wall to be damaged and the pit to collapse. Guard the front. Don't care about the enemies that rushed in, there are Dionia people behind to deal with them. The reason why he said this was because he had already seen the heavily armed Dionia soldiers waiting behind the gap in the wooden wall. The quick and orderly movement of the Dionysian army surprised him. For the soldiers of the Second Legion, the collapse of the wooden wall was a good thing. They could finally make up for the regret of not being able to go up the wall to kill the enemy. When the British warriors stepped on the collapsed rampart, kicked the broken wooden fence, and rushed into the wall, they suddenly found themselves facing an iron wall surrounded by countless copper shields and countless sharp spears. In the rhythmic sound of the war drums, the Dionia soldiers steadily stabbed and retracted their spears. Every stab could take away a life. The British warriors who rushed in could not form a formation with their companions, nor were they organized by the team officers. They could not rely on their individual bravery to resist the attacks of the Dionysian army. They also had to guard against the arrows shot from the sentry tower above and the javelins of the Abyssinia soldiers. In the short period of time after breaking through the wooden wall, the casualties of the British warriors rose sharply. They were terrified and wanted to retreat, but their way back was blocked by the excited soldiers behind them. The 3rd and 4th legions of the 2nd Legion advanced steadily, shrinking the encirclement, causing the British warriors to be crowded together. It was difficult for them to even wave their weapons. At first, Penland was happy to see many British warriors rushing into the gap, but soon the scene there seemed to have stagnated. The warriors lingered at the gap, but could not enter. He felt a little uneasy. Then, he was surprised to see that the British warriors suddenly scattered and fled. From the gap in the wall, teams of Dionia soldiers in bright armor rushed out. They took the opportunity to attack the other British warriors, who were attacking the city with all their might from the side. Soon, the retreat was no longer just the gap, but the entire British attack line. Seeing this scene, Penland's heart sank, and he extinguished the hope of victory. He could see that the Dionysian army that occupied Abyssinia was not just a non-main force of Dionia, which only had a few thousand soldiers. It was very likely to be the legion that the Diorians claimed. "Retreat!" he shouted out in pain. However, when he finally gathered the defeated soldiers and returned to the camp in frustration, he received worse news. "What did you say? There's a riot in the city of Cosenza?" "Yes, great leader. Sodom, Sax, Bua, a dozen tribes suddenly led their people to attack the inner city on the 2nd morning after you left. If it wasn't for the timely arrival of Chief Kaderk's troops, I'm afraid they would have attacked the inner city. Right now, they have occupied the west side of the outer city. The high priest has sent me to inform you as soon as possible. He hopes that you can quickly pacify these rebels and restore peace to Cosenza." The messenger said anxiously. "Understood. Go back and tell the high priest that I will immediately return with the army. Tell him not to panic, and to defend the inner city with Kaderk first." Penland quickly made a decision. Back then, in order to monitor and rule these disobedient tribes, the Council of 7 Elders, discussed and decided to force them to move to the outer city of Cosenza, which resulted in the current situation. This time, the rebellion was a wake-up call for Pinlan. The invasion of the Dionia had affected the various tribes in the Briti region, especially the tribes that were previously dissatisfied with the alliance. He had to act quickly to prevent the situation from worsening. He sent Petaru to carry out the order to break camp. Soon, Bergam barged into the main tent and shouted excitedly, "Did I hear it wrong? Pinlan, you want to return to Cosenza? Let the Dionia continue to build the fortress here, and we're leaving just like that?" Elder Bergam, in this terrible situation, what else can we do? Continue to attack the fortress? Pinlan was no longer as anxious as he was when he first heard the news. He asked calmly, "There are probably 6,000 to 7,000 well-trained Dionia soldiers behind the wall, and more than 2,000 Abyssinia traders who have defected to them. In addition to that well-defended fortress, do you think we can take this fortress with just the few of us? You have to know that we have lost nearly 2,000 people in today's battle. 2,000 people. That's equivalent to more than half of the Anbalian warriors you brought." After listening to this, Bergam sat down dejectedly. After a while, he raised his head and murmured in a dry voice, "Are we just going to watch the Dionia army pass through Abyssinia and invade our homeland? Then let them come." Pinlan roared. His eyes were full of vigor as he looked straight at Bergam. He walked up to him and gave him a strong hug. In a firm tone, he said resolutely, "We want to go back and gather all the Briti warriors. We want to fight to the death with the Dionia on the Cosenza plateau. This battle will determine the rise and fall of the Briti people. The goddess of the plateau, Amara, will protect us." Plateau. After being reminded by Pinlan, Bergam's fighting spirit was reignited. "Yes, we have the protection of Amara. We also have the Cosenza plateau." The high-spirited Sinsing had gained the support of many tribes in the north of the Grimentum and smoothly marched south. After arriving in the south, he finally encountered an obstacle. The tribes that had previously moved from Nudum were the first tribes to surrender to Dionia. Compared to Picassus in the far west of the Grimentum, they identified with Dionia and trusted Dionia more. They drove out the messengers sent by Sinsing and united to fight against Picassus. Sinsing was furious and was ready to lead the army to attack these disobedient tribes. But news came. There was movement in the north of the Grimentum city. About 2,000 Dionia soldiers came out of the city. This made Sinsing worry that when he attacked the Lucania tribe in the south, he would suddenly be attacked by the Dionia from the flank, so he had to withdraw his troops. As soon as Picassus's troops withdrew, the Dionia people immediately retreated back into the city. This happened for 2 days in a row. Sinsing concluded that the Dionia people in the city were just putting on a show. They had neither the guts nor the intention to attack him. Therefore, he asked Nennet to take 2,000 soldiers to keep an eye on the Grimentum city while he led the army to prepare to conquer the southern tribes. At this time, Picassus sent a messenger to tell him bad news. 1,000 Hellenes had invaded Picassus's territory. They destroyed the farmland and burned the settlement. Picassus did not dare to attack rashly because of the limited number of troops in the city. He asked Sinsing to return urgently. Chapter 3:21. Sinsing thought angrily, "Elia, this small Greek nation that has always been oppressed by Picassus and almost destroyed actually dares to cause trouble in Picassus's territory. Could it be that after becoming a member of the Dionia alliance, these Greek cowards who only know how to hide in the city have the courage to do so? Doesn't it know that after provoking Picassus, no one can save it?" He swore in his heart, "After conquering the Grimentum, I must destroy Elia." But dreams were dreams, and the problem of reality had to be solved. Although the battle on his side was at a critical moment, Picassus had to immediately go to the rescue. Although 1,000 Elia people could not break through the city of Picassus, letting them wreak havoc outside the city would shake the support of the tribesmen for Sinsing. Over the years, Sinsing had used various means to make his tribe have an absolute advantage over the other tribes in Picassus, but Picassus was not the only tribe. Even in his tribe, the elders and priests were not completely loyal to him. Last time, the tribe was already somewhat dissatisfied with the defeat in the Grimentum. This time, he had to take immediate action against the invasion of Elia. Otherwise, if the warriors found out, their anger alone would give him a headache. He had no choice but to stop the attack that he was about to launch again. He sent Nennet to lead 3,000 men, 2,000 from Picassus and 1,000 from the other tribes, back to reinforce Picassus city. He wanted to wipe out all the invading enemies as soon as possible to vent the anger in his heart. At the same time, the delay of the attack meant that the pressure on the army's food supply had increased. He also sent a team of warriors to gather food from all over the place. The so-called gathering was actually burning, killing, and looting. This forced the neutral tribes to either escape into the mountains or join the tribes in the southern part of the Grimentum, which was Dionia's side. In Kenapetitia, the Dionia Legio IV's crossbow shells had been firing for most of the day, causing many cracks to appear on the city walls. The flying rubble even injured and killed some of the defending soldiers, causing the soldiers on the city walls to tremble in fear and low morale. Great leader Panjuru had no choice but to make up his mind, send out troops in the middle of the night to destroy these terrifying siege weapons. In fact, the ballista itself was not heavy. Helos, who had always been cautious, did not move it back to the barracks when darkness fell. Instead, he only built a barricade in front of the ballista group to lure the snake out of its hole. As a result, Kenapetia's assault troops were ambushed by the Legio IV soldiers around the ballista. After a round of fighting, they were almost wiped out. After losing a few hundred soldiers, Panjuru no longer dared to act rashly. The next day, under the cover of the long-range fire of the ballista and light infantry, the soldiers and the Trine people built 3 causeways to the trench in front of the city. They then began to lay stone slabs on the causeways 100 meters outside the city. Then, the Kenapetia warriors were surprised to see 3 wooden towers being slowly pushed onto the causeway that had been paved with stone slabs. These wooden towers were 5 meters high, and with the addition of the 1-meter-high causeway, they were 2 meters higher than the stone walls. The width of the towers was the same, 2 meters above and 3 meters below. They were made of wood and covered with wet cowhide. At the bottom were huge wooden wheels, and at the top were wooden ramparts that could accommodate 3 to 4 archers. A drawbridge hung at the top, and a long wooden ladder was dragged behind it. When the siege tower approached the city wall, the drawbridge was lowered and placed on the top of the wall. The soldiers could climb the wooden ladder, pass through the tower and the drawbridge, and directly enter the wall, making the siege easier. The siege tower designed by the Dionia engineers and carpenters was relatively simple, and its function was also very simple. It could not be compared to the giant siege tower made by Syracuse. The only bright spot was that the safety of the labor was well considered. This was because there were 3 wooden poles protruding from the wheels on both sides of the siege tower. Above the wooden poles, there were wooden sheds that looked like eaves. The people pushing the tower stood outside the causeway, and they could stand and hold on to the wooden poles. The wooden sheds helped them block the arrows from the enemy, and they could focus on pushing the siege tower forward. When the towering siege tower slowly moved forward, the Kenapetian warriors were stunned. Although siege towers had long been used in the Mesopotamian plains, they had never appeared in the Greek world, which was a small country with few people and many city-states. The overlord of Syracuse, Dionysius, was the first to make a breakthrough in Greek siege technology. However, this had just happened and had not spread to the Bruttii. They had never seen such a huge siege machine. Arrows, and javelins could not damage it at all, and the stones thrown could not reach far. Perhaps the siege weapons of Dionia, which could fire stone bombs, could destroy it, but the Kenapetians did not. The warriors could only watch as it approached the moat. Then, the archers in heavy armor entered the siege tower, climbed the wooden ladder to the top of the tower, and began to shoot at the warriors on the city wall. Arrows flew back and forth from both sides. The Dionia archers, who were on high ground and protected by armor and wooden railings, clearly had the upper hand despite having fewer men. The Dionia soldiers took the opportunity to fill the moat with sand, so that the siege tower could be pushed to the bottom of the city wall. The anxious Pandru ordered his men to stop the enemy's attempt, and at the same time, he sent people to Cosenza to ask for reinforcements. He knew in his heart that if there were no reinforcements, Canopetia would be breached in a matter of days. Although the bloody and cruel battle in the fortress happened yesterday, it felt like a long time ago. Early that morning, the 2nd Legion Commander Dracos, the 1st Battalion Commander Adrianx, and other officers waited outside Ciudad Abyssinia with smiles on their faces, welcoming the arrival of Archon Diolia, the supreme commander of the army, the Devers. Among the welcoming team were the original leaders of Ciudad Abyssinia, Bagalipi, Brim, the new leader Creru, and some nobles from the various tribes of Abyssinia. They were either nervous, excited, or agitated as they waited for the supreme commander of Dionia. To prevent any accidents, Dracos ordered the 5th and 6th battalions in the city to deploy and be on high alert. Creru, is the Archon Devers of Dionia really younger than us? Bagalipi's young nephew, Rodum, could not help but ask Creru who was beside him. In the past, their relationship could only be described as ordinary, but after yesterday's battle, the two youths quickly became friends. I've asked Drax it should be so, but don't treat him as a young man, Creru reminded, quietly pointing at the officers of Legio III. Look at Dracos and those people from Dionia. They usually look up to us, but now they look completely different. They don't look like they're welcoming a young man. Of course I understand. I heard from Uncle Bagalipi that the Devers are the descendants of a certain Greek god, and have never lost on the battlefield. No one in Dionia dares to disrespect him, Rodum replied. At this moment, a soldier rushed over from the defensive camp in the east, shouting excitedly as he ran, Lord Devers is here. He's here. Dracos immediately shouted, Get ready! The officers began to tidy up their uniforms, and bugles and military drums sounded together. After a while, the sound of orderly footsteps could be heard, and a long column soon appeared in front of everyone. The person at the front of the column was dressed in full military uniform, leather sandals, bronze shin armor, and linen breastplate. He was no different from an ordinary heavy infantry soldier, only his helmet was different. It was not the heavy Corinth helmet, but a new type of iron helmet. The crown was decorated with long red and purple feathers, very elegant. There was no protection on the front of the helmet, only the cheeks on the two sides were protected by chin guards, so people could see his face clearly. He had a wide forehead, thick eyebrows, a high nose, a moderate chin, and eyes that were not big but extremely spirited. He looked young but not childish, and there was a sense of majesty in his eyes. His strides were big and powerful, but his speed was not too fast. He seemed to be full of vigor and steady. These are the Archon Devers of Dionia? The curious people of Abyssinia found the answer in the straight chests and respectful eyes of the generals and soldiers of Dionia. The Devers came in front of Dracos under hundreds of focused eyes. Dracos gave a neat military salute. Sir Commander, all the soldiers of the 2nd Legion welcome your arrival. The Devers immediately returned the salute and said half-jokingly, Well done, Drax, you put up a big scene. When did you learn to do this? Dracos looked at Adrianx, a little embarrassed. The Devers understood and said with a smile, It's Adrianx's idea, right? It seems that the Isthmian Games was not in vain. But such a ceremony should still be done after the war is over. During the war, everything should be simple. If someone else had said this, Adrianx would have thought that they were poking at his scars, and he would definitely be dissatisfied. But for the Devers' words, he carefully thought about it and agreed. Sir, you are right. The war is not over yet, we must take it seriously. The Devers laughed heartily, and went forward to give Adrianx a warm hug. I was shocked when I heard the news on the way here. Adrianx, you only used 700 people to capture Ciudad Abyssinia. What a bold and decisive move. Amazing! Amazing! You and your 1st Battalion can definitely get a star. And the people of Dionia will be happy to celebrate your victory. This was what Adrianx was happy to hear. All the grudges in his heart were gone, and he was so happy that he did not know how to respond. Chapter 322. Dracos chuckled. He was proud that the 2nd Legion was no longer the 1st Legion's follower. The Devers patted his shoulder and asked, "Where is the hero who crossed the Krati River?" "He was injured while crossing the river. He is receiving treatment from the doctors in the city. He can't go out for the time being," Dracos answered. "He's injured. Is it serious?" The Devers asked with concern. "I heard from the doctors that a few of his ribs were broken on his left side. His lungs are injured and there are some external injuries. However, he will recover after some rest. Without him, we wouldn't have won today. We must take good care of him," the Devers urged. "Don't worry, sir. We will take good care of him." The Devers nodded. He was about to say something when he saw a large group of people walking in their direction. He immediately smiled and strode toward the oldest man from Abyssinia. "Are you Chief Bagalipi?" Bagalipi hurriedly bowed and was ready to salute Brudi. "Chief Bagalipi of the Perga tribe of Abyssinia greets Sir Consul Devers." The Devers quickly stopped him and said passionately, "Thank you. Without your help, Abyssinia would not have recovered its peace so quickly. The people of Dionia and Abyssinia should thank you. Because of your decisiveness and selflessness, they will not have another family member die in vain." The words of the Devers made the white-haired old man emotional. Many people in Abyssinia had called him a traitor these few days. One could imagine the grievance he felt. At this moment, the young man in front of him gave him the feeling that it was hard to meet a bosom friend. "Because of your achievements, I've proposed that the Senate of Dionia hold an emergency meeting. Through a majority vote, you'll become a member of the Senate of Dionia, just like Vespa and Hemont of Lucania. You'll become a respected elder of the entire alliance of Dionia. I wonder if you're willing to accept this?" After listening to Devers's words, the steady Bagalipi showed a shocked expression, but soon he answered without hesitation, as if he was afraid that Devers would go back on their words, because this was what he hoped for. "I do. Thank you, Senate, for your trust in me." Devers held his arms and laughed. "That's great. From now on, we are a family." Dracos, Adrianx, and the others congratulated Bagalipi. Bagalipi showed a rare smile. At this moment, he heard coughing behind him. Only then did he remember that he had overlooked something. He quickly turned around and said, "Sir Devers, let me introduce you. This is Leader Brim of Abyssinia." Before he finished speaking, Devers had already rushed to salute him. On the way, he had already learned about the situation of several leading figures of Abyssinia in detail. At this moment, he said enthusiastically, "It was with your help that Dracos and the others were able to defend the fortress. Similarly, the Senate of Dionia, in order to thank you for what you've done, invites you to join the Senate." After listening to Bagalipi's translation, Brim was a little stunned. Previously, when he saw Kazensa's army retreating from the fortress, he knew that Abyssinia would no longer belong to Brudi. However, he still found it a little hard to accept that it would suddenly belong to an alliance dominated by the Greek. "Say something, are you happy?" Bagalipi gave him a look and pushed him. "I'm very happy," Brim mumbled softly. Divers did not take it to heart. He laughed and said, "Elder Brim, rest well. We still need your help in the upcoming battle." Just as Brim responded, Krelu squeezed forward. Before he could speak, Devers looked at him and said loudly, "I know you, Krelu, the hero of Abyssinia. If it weren't for you, How could the warriors of Abyssinia return home so smoothly? After listening to Bagalipi's translation, Krelu did not expect that the consul of Dionia, whom he had never met before, not only recognized him, but also knew about his deeds. He was both excited and proud. Originally, I have proposed to the Senate to let you enter the Senate. However, you are too young and have never managed a tribe before. The senators of the Senate believe that you should first be appointed as an official of Dionia affairs. After you have accumulated a certain amount of administrative experience, the senators of the Senate will open the door for you. Devers explained to him that he did make a proposal to the Senate, but it was just for show. He did not want to let this young man enter the Senate now. That would only lower the quality of the senators in the Senate, and it would also make people feel that the threshold of the Senate was too low. Previously, senators such as Amintas, Alpuenshi, and Leds were not of high quality. However, that was the initial stage, and Devers needed a lot of support. The situation was different now. Krelu was a little disappointed. However, as an ordinary tribesman of the Nikru tribe of Abyssinia not long ago, he had become the leader of a tribe in the blink of an eye. He could not expect too much, so he said modestly, compared to the two leaders, Bagalipi and Broom, I still know too little. I will do my best to help my tribesmen adapt to our new home, Dionia. Devers nodded. Although this leader was young, he was steady and knew his limit. Devers was satisfied with his position. Before entering the city, the Devers went to the small riverbank. Amidst the roar of the Krati River, Devers listened to Dracos narrate the process of the ambush on Ciudad Abyssinia. Although he was the one who came up with the plan, he could still feel the thrill of that night as he watched the raging river. He could not help but say emotionally, I don't think there's any problem with Sikorian wishing to leave his name on the Hall of Valhalla. It is his bravery and fearlessness, and that of another brave man, that have allowed us to stand on this beach. I hope that their deeds will inspire the citizens of Dionia to be brave enough to contribute to the Alliance, and the Alliance will always remember those who have contributed. Sir, you are right. Dracos felt the same way. Most of the people of Abyssinia who followed the Devers to the riverbank only then knew the reason for the fall of the town. Some of them even thought that if they had built 1 or 2 watchtowers at the riverbank, today's events would not have happened at this moment. The Devers turned around and said to Bagalipi and the rest, Turii and Abyssinia are actually not that far apart, but the river separates Turii and Abyssinia from each other. It also makes life difficult for the people of Abyssinia. Therefore, when the war is over, not only will we build a cable bridge here, we will also build a real bridge, so that Ciudad Abyssinia will no longer be a poor and remote place, but a place where merchants gather and pedestrians must pass through. Ciudad Abyssinia will definitely prosper, because from Turii to Cosenza Highlands, Abyssinia is the shortest route. The Devers' words made Bagalipi and the other people of Abyssinia who could understand Greek excited. Back at the city gate, he refused to let the army enter the city. Instead, he asked the newly arrived 1st Legion, the Allied Army, and the Legion Reserve Army to expand and settle in the defensive camp in the east. However, the tens of thousands of heavily armed soldiers circling in front of the city gate still made the people of Abyssinia afraid. After entering the council hall of Ciudad Abyssinia, the Devers did not waste a second to discuss the ownership of Abyssinia with the 3 Abyssinia leaders and a few tribal nobles. After half a day of discussion, they finally reached an agreement. 1. After Abyssinia was merged into the Union of Dionia, the Senate would appoint a governor to manage the administration of Ciudad Abyssinia. 2. The tribes would still have jurisdiction over their people and land. The tribal leaders would exercise the right of management, and the city governor would not interfere. 3. The land tax must be paid by the leaders on time, and military training must be attended regularly. 4. Given that Abyssinia was the first town in the Brutto area to be merged into Dionia, the tribes could apply to the Senate to change the fertile tribal territory. 5. The people of Abyssinia enjoyed the same rights and obligations as the people of Lucania. At the same time, when they voluntarily asked to leave the tribe and live independently, the tribal leaders could not stop them. After the agreement was reached, Bagalipi hesitated and said, "Master Devers, I have a small request." "Please speak," the Devers replied politely. "As the lifetime governor of the most powerful city-state union in southern Italy, you have too few guards. Like our Brudi leaders, which one of them did not have 200 to 300 or even 1,000 guards around them. Therefore, I hope that my nephew Rodum can become your bodyguard and protect your safety. At the same time, he can also learn how to be a qualified citizen of Dionia under your guidance." "Rodum?" The Devers remembered the energetic young man in the welcoming team. He was about to respond when the others in the hall realized the benefits of Bagalipi's proposal and shouted, "Master Devers, my son also wants to be your guard. And my 2 sons. There are 5 in our tribe." The reason why the people in the hall were so enthusiastic was because of the tradition of Abyssinia. When Nikaru was tyrannical, almost every family had sent their children to be his guards. Now that they were conquered, it was inevitable that they would feel a sense of gain and loss. If they could have a closer relationship with the highest authority in Dionia, they would be happy to add more security to their families and tribes. Chapter 323. As a warrior who shared the same fame as Marcius, Marcius was content with his lot. He did not have much ambition and was loyal to his duty. Therefore, the Devers had always trusted him. Although the Praetorian guards were full, they were still responsible for guarding important places such as the Senate, the Temple of Hades, and the arena. The vacancies could be filled by the young people recommended by the leaders and tribal nobles in the hall. In order to integrate the people of Abyssinia into the Dionia alliance as soon as possible, the young elites of Abyssinia should be allowed to join the government of the Dionia alliance. They should understand the system of Dionia as soon as possible, learn the culture of Dionia, and get used to the life of Dionia. Then, like Bagalipi said, they should be assimilated into the people of Dionia and return to influence the people of Abyssinia. He needed to go back and discuss this matter with the Senate. However, he could agree to it for now and join the Praetorian Guards as volunteers of Abyssinia. After the Devers made up their minds, they immediately agreed to it. Soon, Ciudad Abyssinia gathered a guard of more than 60 people. The Devers appointed Rodum as the captain of the guard and announced that they would be responsible for keeping watch for him tonight. As soon as the order was issued, it was strongly opposed by Dracos, Capus, and the others. However, the Devers insisted and declared, "Now that Abyssinia is the Abyssinia of Dionia, the warriors of Abyssinia are also the soldiers of Dionia. What commander doesn't trust his soldiers?" In the end, the Devers, Dracos, and Capus reached an agreement. Marcius would lead the guards to guard outside the courtyard, while the warriors of Abyssinia would guard inside. When Rodum and the others received the news, they were greatly moved and swore not to let the Devers, who trusted them, be frightened. The people of Abyssinia, who were originally anxious, were relieved by this action of the Devers. Other than the high-ranking generals of the legion, the ones who were most afraid of accidents were the Bagalipi leaders and the tribal nobles. If something happened to the Devers, the 2,000 Dionia soldiers in the city and the 10,000 soldiers outside the city would burn Ciudad Abyssinia to ashes. Therefore, they repeatedly reminded the tribesmen who were in charge of guarding the city tonight. The night passed peacefully. The next day, the Devers, who had a good night's sleep, and Capus, Dracos, the 3 leaders of Abyssinia, as well as the generals of Heraclea and Castellan's allies, discussed the matter of marching to the Cosenza highlands. Sinsing waited for the reinforcements to quickly defeat the Hellenes and return. In fact, he didn't have to wait too long before he saw Ninath fleeing back with hundreds of wounded soldiers. "What did you say? You were ambushed by the Dionia?" Sinsing looked incredulous. How could there be Dionia's army outside the city of Picassus? Grimentum has always been under my surveillance. They didn't send a single troop. Ninath shook his head and said weakly, Hellenes. I'm afraid they came from Hellenes. I saw it very clearly. Although they were all wearing Greek armor, most of their stature and hair color, even their roars were Lucanian. After his son's reminder, Sinsing's train of thought suddenly opened. You mean they came from Nudum? Why didn't our spies find them? On the way back, Ninath had already thought about the matter clearly. He coughed and said anxiously, They should have boarded the ship from Laos. Maybe they didn't go along the coast, cough. Instead, they took a detour. Our warships can't fight against the warships of Laos and Hellenes. We can only cruise around the port, It's good that we didn't get blocked. They have about 3,000 or 4,000 people. Father, what should we do now? Go back. We must return to Picassus immediately. Sinsing already had a bad feeling. Can your body hold up? Ninath nodded. What about those tribes? Let them come with us. We need more warriors now. If any tribe refuses to go with us, Sinsing's face showed a sinister expression as he said coldly, We will do what we did in the Grimentum. As soon as he finished speaking, a spy hurried in. Report, great leader. A Dionysian army has appeared to the north of us. There are about 4,000 people. Report. The tribes in the south have gathered about 5,000 warriors and are coming towards our camp. Report, great leader. The Grimentum's army has left the city. It has been confirmed that their general is Bagul. Bad news came one after another, causing Sinsing to break out in a cold sweat. His whole body was soaked. When he heard the news, he was shocked. You said that Bagul is not injured? It seems so, great leader. Sinsing was dumbfounded. After a while, he murmured, A conspiracy. This is a conspiracy planned by the Dionia. He suddenly remembered something and said hurriedly, Quick, call the leaders of Lud and Burina. If they don't want to come, we have to force them to come. As soon as the guard went out, one of the leaders of Picassus stumbled in. Great leader, this is bad. Lud and Burina are leading a riot. Pfft. Sinsing was so anxious that he spat a mouthful of blood on the ground. Dionia attacked the Picassus camp from the north, east, and south. The camp was in chaos and could not organize an effective defense, so it was easily breached. Ninath died in battle. Sinsing took a few of his tribesmen and fled to the mountains in the west. Most of the others surrendered. Commander Hieronymus, what should we do with so many captives? Bagul asked his superior. According to the orders of Master Devers, all of them will be demoted to slaves of the city and brought back to Turii as laborers for mining, repairing roads, and building temples. Hieronymus said to himself, not noticing the expression on Bagul's face. Also, take out 1,000 Picassus captives and follow us to attack Picassus city to force the tribes in the city to surrender. Then he ordered, Bagul, continue to guard Grimentum city. At the same time, do not let down your surveillance of Potentia in the north. If there is any abnormality, immediately send a messenger to inform me. Yes. Agacia, supervise the soldiers to speed up the cleaning of the battlefield. Otherwise, we won't be able to rest at night. Don't worry, Commander. I'll keep my eyes open like a shepherd watching over a flock of sheep. Whoever dares to slack off, I'll spank his butt. Agacia laughed. Legio III carefully carried out the plan proposed by the Devers and perfected together to lure the enemy. Finally, there was a relatively perfect result. After Hieronymus finished assigning the tasks, he showed a rare relaxed smile. Big brother! Assists called out to Bagul, who was walking back with his head lowered. Master Devers once said, Don't be too kind to the enemy who surrenders. If you are too kind, the enemy will forget the mistakes they have made and make the same mistake again. So, sometimes we also have to raise the wooden stick high and let the enemy remember the lesson with fear. Master called it the bread and stick method. Assists looked at Bagul, who was deep in thought, and said with a serious expression, "Our bill to appease the tribes in the north is good enough. Not only did we give them land, but we also selflessly allocated some cattle and sheep. But when we encountered danger, they did not stand with us to tide over the difficulties. Instead, they turned to the enemy and wanted to destroy us and divide more of our land. This time, they were severely punished. I believe it will shock all the Lucania tribes in this land. When they make decisions related to us, they will think carefully. Should they choose to accept the bread or choose to accept the stick?" Bagul looked at the busy soldiers on the battlefield. They dismantled the enemy's camp, picked up the supplies on the ground, grabbed the abandoned weapons, and removed the armor from the corpses. They placed them on a fully loaded pack car, then lifted the enemy's corpses and threw them into the burning pile of corpses. The mountain wind blew, and ashes floated everywhere in the air. Bagul sighed and said, "I hope that after this battle, Lucania municipality can truly restore peace." Bagul spat out the depression in his heart. He slapped Assists on the shoulder and said loudly, "No matter what, we have finally solved the problem of Sinsing. We have to celebrate. Tonight I will be a guest at your house. I have not tasted the lamb roasted by my sister for a long time. Let's not go home until we are drunk." A month later, the people of Sinsing who had escaped into the mountains were tired of hiding from the Dionia soldiers all day long. At the same time, they had to endure the hardships of life in the mountains and the increasingly crazy insults and scoldings of Sinsing. Finally, they could not help but kill Sinsing while he was asleep. They went down the mountains and surrendered to the city of Gramentum. This was a story for another time. When Pinlan led the army back to Cosenza, the rioting tribes had long fled. In the following time, he led Petaru and Ferroterror to appease the people in the city and meet with the leaders of the other tribes in the city. Just as he was busy, Kenapesha's messenger arrived at Cosenza. Chapter 324. In the exaggerated description of the messenger, one of the siege weapons could throw a round stone the size of a jar hundreds of meters away and accurately hit the city wall. The powerful impact could cause damage to the city wall, and after a long period of time, the city wall might even collapse. The other weapon was like a mobile sentry tower. It was built higher than the city wall, and the archers at the top of the tower could easily attack the defenders on the city wall. Once it got close to the city wall and lowered the drawbridge, the enemy could easily rush up to the top of the city wall. The combination of these two siege weapons was a nightmare for any city, but they were both owned by Dionia. Pinlan was not only worried about Kenapesha, he was more worried about Cosenza. In his original plan, in the worst-case scenario, he could retreat to Cosenza and use the strong city wall to resist the attack of Dionia until the enemy ran out of food and retreated. However, the messenger's description had shaken his decision. He did not want to be trapped in the city and be bombarded by dozens of siege weapons by Dionia. Therefore, Kenapesha must be defended. Otherwise, if Dionia captured it, Cosenza would be attacked from both sides. But at this moment the natural moat had been lost, and Dionia had a great advantage in strength. The Brudi alliance was in a difficult situation. It was too passive to rely on defense alone, and the possibility of failure was too high. Therefore, Pinlan was more inclined to take the risk and attack. As long as he could defeat the main force of Dionia, all the difficulties would be solved. He looked at Abyssinia, which had already surrendered, because it was the closest to the center of Dionia, Turii. Dionia's main force would definitely attack from here. After thinking about it repeatedly, he finally made the final decision: send 2,000 reinforcements to Kenapesha and at the same time persuade Bergam to return to Anbalia. He also sent a messenger to Vig, hoping that the two elders of the alliance, Bergam and Sidorum, could bring as many warriors as possible to support the battle between the Brudi alliance and Dionia. The Devers stayed in Abyssinia for another 2 days in order to wait for the supplies to arrive and meet the needs of the battle. Although Abyssinia was very close to Turii, transportation was rather difficult due to the limited road conditions. The Devers learned their lesson and ordered the soldiers to carry 5 days' worth of rations each. On the morning of the 3rd day, Devers led the 1st Army Corps, the 2nd Army Corps, the Mountain Reconnaissance Brigade, the Cavalry Brigade, the Heraclea Army Corps, the Castellan Army Corps, the Abyssinia Army Corps, the Army Reserve Corps, and 2,000 freedmen. Other than a small portion of the Army Reserve Corps stationed in Ciudad Abyssinia, there were about 24,000 people, including those who were sent to fight in Cosenza. They lined up in a long line and marched westward along the mountain path. When Pinlan received the report from the cavalry, it was already close to noon. The Dionia army had entered the Cosenza highlands, and they had seen the eye-catching flag of the Dionia consul. This news made Pinlan restless, and he immediately called for an emergency meeting. Other than Petaru, Ferodaru, Bergam, and Sidorum, who had just arrived last night, Panjur was still struggling to resist the enemy's attack in Nipetia, and Nikaru had died in battle. Only 5 of the 7 elders' council members were present, which inevitably made the people in the hall feel sad. I think the Dionia army will set up camp in this area when they arrive at Cosenza in the afternoon. Pinlan's finger drew a circle about 6 miles east of Cosenza's icon on the map, and he said excitedly, "With Amara's blessing, we should take advantage of the discomfort they will feel after entering Cosenza, and take the initiative to attack while they are setting up camp, forcing them to fight." Sidorum understood what Pinlan meant by discomfort. The area where Cosenza was located was high, so it was not a problem for outsiders to move normally. However, if they were to exercise strenuously for a long time, they would easily feel tired and have difficulty breathing. On the other hand, the Brudi warriors, especially the people of Cosenza, had adapted to this environment since they were young, and they would not have any abnormal movements. Moreover, he already knew the situation in Nipetia, so he did not have much hope of defending the city to the death. He and Bergam looked at each other solemnly, and finally agreed. So they went back to gather their teams, and nervously waited for the arrival of the Dionia army. However, only half an hour later, Pinlan urgently sent someone to summon them again. "Elders, I have just received news that the Dionia army has stopped advancing near Punate River, and has begun to set up camp," Pinlan said anxiously. "Punate River." Sidorum and Bergam hurriedly looked at the map placed in the middle of the hall. Punate River was more like a stream than a river, and it eventually merged into the upper reaches of Krati River. The area it flowed through was relatively flat, and the key point was that it was almost in the middle of Abyssinia and Cosenza. "We are so far away from Cosenza, and it's still so early. Are we going to rest already?" Bergam muttered to himself in confusion. "Those traitors of Abyssinia! God Amara will punish them!" Ferodaru said angrily. Sidorum understood the reason for the high priest's anger. In his memory, the terrain near Punate River was not as high, and the impact on people was not as obvious. He hurriedly looked at Pinlan and asked, "What are you going to do, great leader?" Pinlan cursed along with the high priest. He also believed that the Dionia army must have leaked the secret to Abyssinia, which ruined his plan. He thought for a moment, then looked at the crowd and said with a serious expression, "Now, Canopetia is being attacked by the enemy every day, and the Dionia army may break through at any time. As for us, should we let the enemy advance slowly and gradually adapt to the weather and environment here, or should we make up our minds and focus on attacking them? It's up to you." Sidorum and Bergam looked at each other again, and their eyes gradually flashed with determination. "Do we still have a choice? God Amara will protect the descendants of Brutus." Ferodaru loudly chanted. The Devers chose to set up camp near Punate River out of caution. When Bagalipi reminded him that outsiders who entered the Cosenza area would experience some discomfort, a word immediately appeared in his mind: altitude sickness. The higher the altitude, the thinner the air, and the lower the oxygen content. People would become tired because of the lack of oxygen. Of course, compared to Tibet in the Far East, the altitude of the Cosenza Plateau was nothing, but in an intense battle, it could very well become a decisive factor. Now that the Devers had the upper hand, there was no need to take risk. They only needed to steadily advance towards Cosenza, let the soldiers gradually adapt to the altitude sickness here, and familiarize themselves with the geographical environment here. At the same time, they would gradually put pressure on Cosenza so that it would not dare to send reinforcements to Canopitia. Although he could not grasp the battlefield situation in Canopitia in time, out of trust in Helos and Legio IV, who had two types of siege weapons, he believed that in Canopitia, the 4th Legion would have the absolute advantage. Once Canopitia was breached, the Dionysian army would advance from the east and west. Not only would it increase their advantage, but it would also intimidate the entire Brutus region, which might directly lead to the disintegration of the Bruti alliance. They might not even need to fight to make the Bruti surrender. Although the idea was beautiful, the Devers did not let down their guard. According to the Daionia military law, he did not let all the soldiers participate in the construction of the camp. Instead, he only let the soldiers of the 1st Legion and the Reserve Legion start working first, with the freedmen assisting. The 2nd Legion and its allies, as well as the warriors of Abyssinia, were responsible for guarding the camp. Why are we the first to build the camp this time? We are the 1st Legion of Daionia. Hetbarus stared at the soldiers of the 2nd Legion who were sitting and resting in front of him. He complained while digging the soil. Maybe it's because the 2nd Legion just finished the battle with the Bruti alliance the day before yesterday, and the commander gave them a reward. Pershals guessed. Leotychides listened to the conversation of his teammates, and his thoughts ran wild. Although the Sparta people also paid more attention to the camp, it was not as important as Daionia to the extent that he thought it was paranoid. When the troops arrived at an important place, the first thing they would think about was how to build an extremely sturdy camp. There were even engineers to measure and check, and if they did not pass, they would be punished. Even though he had practiced many times in the new recruit training camp, and he had put it into practice in Tarentum, he still felt a little uncomfortable. If we, the 1st Legion, were to attack Abyssinia instead of the 2nd Legion, we would have done a better job. It's all because the commander is unfair. He gave this crucial task to the 2nd Legion, while we, the 1st Legion, are either climbing mountains or marching. I don't know how much we've walked these days, but the soles of my feet are blistered. Hetbarus vented his frustration, and then someone slapped him on the head. Hetbarus, stop talking nonsense and work hard. If we lose to Olivers's team because of you, Captain Martones will not let you off easily. Captain Sitarsis scolded. When Martones was mentioned, Hetbarus did not dare to say anything else. Chapter 325. However, the captain was strict with his soldiers on two things. Firstly, during a battle, the soldiers were only allowed to advance and not retreat. Otherwise, he would kick the cowardly soldiers out of the battalion. Secondly, they were not allowed to lose to Olivers's 6th Battalion in any matter. This kind of battle spirit was a little funny, but in the army of Daionia, it was not uncommon to see such competition between companies, battalions, and legions. Moreover, the generals of all levels did not forbid such competition. Instead, they strongly encouraged it. Tug-of-war, rugby, soccer. These popular sports and competitions in the barracks were all team battles between teams, squads, and squads. It was a fierce competition for victory. Leotychides felt that it was precisely because the generals of all levels valued victory that these Daionia militia, who used to be farmers, fishermen, merchants, and so on, quickly developed a sense of honor for their units. That was why they fought bravely in battle. Prososis, I heard that the Lagos and Sparta are enemies. Have you fought with the Sparta before? Hetbarus was a chatterbox. After a moment of silence, he started talking again. After the incident on the ship and the fierce battle with the Puchetti, his friendship with his teammates, especially with Het Barus, had become quite friendly. When Leotychides heard this, to hide the unnatural expression on his face, he did not raise his head. Instead, he bent down and continued to dig. He said softly, "Yes, I have fought." Het Barus' interest was piqued. He leaned closer and asked, "Do you think the Sparta are stronger, or we are?" Leotychides did not expect him to ask this question. He was stunned. The other teammates seemed to be interested as well. They all gathered around, but Captain Sitarsis did not reprimand them. In fact, Het Barus asked the right person. Leotychides was indeed the best person to answer this question. He was a Sparta, and he had been in the Dionysian army for half a year. He had even participated in a battle, so he had a good understanding of the military situation between the two forces. Faced with the curious gazes of his comrades, Leotychides found it hard to refuse them. However, he did not know what to say at the moment. He put down the pickaxe and patted the dirt on his hand. After pondering for a while, he finally said, "Spartans receive cruel agog combat training from the age of 6. Other than learning how to read for a short period of time, they've been living in the barracks until they reach adulthood. The right of adulthood is to kill any black rogues that they encounter alone." "Oh, that's too cruel!" one of his teammates shouted. Leotychides was unmoved. He continued, "After they reach adulthood, the Sparta do nothing but fight and fight until they die. That's why the Sparta are the best warriors in the world. They are familiar with every detail of battle. Killing the enemy is as easy as drinking water for them." At this point, his pride as a Sparta appeared again. Some of his teammates hissed in dissatisfaction. "Prososus, how can you praise the Sparta like that? Are you really a Lagos?" someone complained. Leotychides was shocked. He had been getting along well with his teammates recently, so he had slightly let his guard down. He quickly said, "However, the Sparta warriors are too few. The number of their young citizens is only slightly more than half of a legion of Dionia. Even if we include the Pythias, there are only more than 10,000 of them. The soldiers of Dionia are the best among all the city-states that I know of that don't fight for a living. Also, your military system is very unique and well-developed. I personally think that some of the systems are even better than those of Sparta. Most importantly, Dionia has a lot of soldiers. After defeating the Briti, I'm afraid that the number of soldiers will continue to increase." "I understand what you mean, Prososus. We can't defeat the Sparta warriors in a one-on-one fight, but in a real battle, the Sparta warriors can't defeat us because they have too few people, right?" Het Barus interrupted. "The Legion of Dionysia has always emphasized teamwork and teamwork. No matter how strong a Sparta warrior is, he can't defeat 4 to 5 soldiers of the Legion of Dionysia who work closely together." Pershals continued. "That's right. It's like a running back in a football game. No matter how good he is, he can't score without the help of his teammates." Another teammate shouted. Leotychides knew him. He was a citizen candidate of Dionia. He had violated the rules many times in the boot camp and was punished. During the battle against the Puchetti, one of the soldiers in Leotychides' team was seriously injured. That was why he was added to the team. However, he was now a qualified soldier of the Legion. This was the terrifying thing about the military system of Dionia. It could train the undisciplined Greeks into qualified soldiers in a short period of time through various methods such as training, sports, and competitions. The Sparta, who established their country on the basis of military force, had discovered a truth in their long campaigns. The strength of an individual was only secondary to the strength of a city-state's army. What was important was strict discipline, unconditional obedience, and persistent training. Most Greek city-states could neither understand nor implement this, but the newly established Dionia required this from the very beginning. It was said that this was the work of the Archon Devers who had been blessed by the gods. It seemed that compared to Dionia and Sparta, the truly terrifying one was this young man. Leotychides did not want his teammates to think that Sparta was weak, so he reminded them, Sparta may have few soldiers, but Sparta rarely fights alone. Don't forget, it's the leader of the Peloponnesus alliance, and now it's the overlord of Greece. Countless soldiers from its alliance fight for it. Most of the generals in Sparta are qualified commanders. Hey, I'm just comparing Sparta to our Dionia. If we're talking about allies, we have allies in Dionysia as well. Laus Castron. Hight Baris said unhappily. And Heraclea. Southern Alliance, Crotone, Silatina, Trine, and Carana. Leotychides felt a little emotional. Many city-states in the eastern Mediterranean would turn pale at the mention of Sparta. Even big states like Athens and Corinth were afraid of Sparta soldiers. However, these Dionia soldiers were fearlessly discussing who was stronger between Dionia and Sparta. It was not that they were ignorant, but their repeated victories had given them confidence. Their shouts finally caught the attention of Parmenius, who was not far away. He was furious. Why are you gossiping instead of digging the trenches? Aren't you afraid of military law? His teammates quickly dispersed and went about their own business. Squad leader Sitarsis came over and said in a low voice, Prososis, you're right, but next time remember to change the you to we. When Leotychides heard this, he could not help but feel embarrassed. Deep down, he had not truly integrated into Dionia and saw himself as a citizen of Dionia. While the soldiers of the First Legion were busy, the Devers were talking to Tryphias, the commander of the allied forces in Heraclea. You want to invite our engineers to Heraclea to build bridges? Yes, Sir Devers. I've heard in Heraclea that Dionia's bridge-building skills are very good. This time, I've brought my troops here and passed through the 2 wooden bridges in Turiae and gained a deeper understanding. I'm sure you know that there are many rivers in Heraclea's territory. The main city of Heraclea is built on a delta surrounded by the Agri River and its tributaries. The rainy season in March and April every year is the most difficult season for us people in Heraclea. Tryphias sighed and said helplessly, when the river rises, the pontoon bridges are often washed away. We even have to sail out to sea every day and dock at the shore before we can rush to our farms. So, we urgently need a few real, sturdy bridges, just like the wooden bridges on the Claude River. After listening to Tryphias's request, the Devers gladly promised, Heraclea is an ally of Dionia. We're happy to provide such help. I heard that young Heraclea is a master of building bridges, but he also serves as a public official in Dionia's road management. We, Heraclea, are willing to donate 50 tons of wheat to Dionia to thank young Heraclea and his team for providing us with help in their spare time, Tryphias said sincerely. The Devers did not decline. Dionia was currently short of food, and Tryphias's offer was a timely help. This made the Devers look at him in a higher light. Although Heraclea had a dense water network and fertile land, 50 tons of wheat was by no means a small amount. This gift from Heraclea was definitely not just a reward for building the bridge, but also an expression of Heraclea's attitude. The Devers engraved this in their hearts. With this agreement, the conversation between the Devers and Tryphias became more intimate and casual. The Devers even happily said that he did not expect the Cosenza region to have such a good pasture that could be used to breed war horses. Just as the two of them were chatting happily, the messenger Tormid rushed over with a nervous look on his face. Commander, Leds urgently reported, Brudi's troops are marching here. How many are there? The Devers immediately asked. According to the judgment of the scouts, there may be 20,000 of them. Chapter 326. The Devers did not intend to fight with the Brudi alliance at this time, so they chose to camp here. At the same time, he thought that the Brudi alliance would be more cautious after the failure of the siege the day before. They would have been more cautious and abandoned their geographical advantage. The possibility of them marching dozens of miles to challenge them was not high, but they did not expect the enemy to really come. Since they were here, let's fight. Both sides had equal strength. Although half of the soldiers in the Dionysian army might be a little tired from building the camp, this was not a reason to avoid the battle. The enemy came out in full force. The Devers suddenly stood up and asked, "How is the construction of the camp going?" "The trench has been dug, and we are building the earth barricade," Tormid replied, and then asked, "Do we need to let the soldiers retreat behind the trench?" The Devers waved his hand, indicating that he refused. The Legion of Dionysia had always focused on offense. Although the trench could increase the difficulty of the enemy's attack, it also limited their ability to attack, so the morale of the soldiers could not be fully exerted. He would not do this unless it was a special situation. Blow the horn to gather, then call the two commanders, Capus and Dracos, as well as the cavalry captain, Leds. By the way, call Epicthenus and Xpit too, the Devers ordered. Yes. Tormid quickly rushed to pass the order. We are going to fight with the Briti alliance here? Tryphias was a little nervous. Yes, it seems that the end of the war with the Briti alliance is coming forward. The Devers smiled confidently. Tryphias was infected by his smile and relaxed. He gave a Greek military salute. "Then please allow me to gather my soldiers first." Penland led the army toward the Punate River. After crossing a high slope, there was a wide and flat grassland below. On the grassland, countless Greeks were gathering and forming a formation. From above, it looked like a pile of ants that had their nest dug out. It was a messy scene, and he could not help but look down on it. "Stop advancing and get into formation," he immediately ordered. Though the formation of the Greeks had not yet taken shape, he was able to get a general idea of it from his position on the high slope. To the right of the Dionia was the confluence of the Punate and the Crati, and to the left was a flat grassland without any terrain obstacles. Behind them was a mess of pits dug by the Dionia. After watching for a while, he made a decision in his heart. Because it was difficult to move on the riverside, and there was little room for attack and maneuver, he placed the 5,000 tribal warriors forcibly recruited from various tribes on the left wing, the 5,000 warriors from Anbalia and Whig City in the middle, and the 12,000 warriors from Cosenza on the right. Obviously, he wanted to use the Cosenza warriors, who were the most numerous and had the strongest combat power, to secure victory on the right flank. Penland's original idea was to take advantage of the enemy's confusion to quickly form a formation and attack. However, for an army of more than 20,000 people from different tribes to get into formation in a short period of time, it required a complete command system, long-term military training, and very disciplined soldiers. The Brutians did not meet these requirements, so the entire army slowly got into formation amidst the blowing of horns, the beating of drums, the shouting of men, the neighing of horses, the pushing and shoving of each other, and the chaos of the entire army. Penland was originally quite leisurely observing the movements of the enemy while waiting for his own formation to be completed. But after a while, his expression became a little ugly. That was because the Dionians, who were in a mess just a moment ago, quickly formed into small cubes. Then, the countless cubes rapidly moved to fixed positions like building blocks without interfering with each other. Soon, the Dionia formation began to take shape. It was a formation that Penland had never seen before. The small cubes were not close together, but there were a lot of gaps. Looking down from above, it looked like pieces of green and white wool blankets, because the linen breastplate was white. Although Penland did not know how powerful such a strange formation was, the speed at which the Dionia people formed their formation still made him feel uneasy. He shouted to Petru next to him, "Go and urge Bergam to move faster." The initial chaos that Penland saw in the Dionia formation was the moment when the soldiers of the First Legion hurriedly crawled out of the bustling camp, put on their armors, and returned to their own units. Now that the formation had begun to form, the slightly nervous mood of the Devers had also calmed down. "Sir Commander, Our right flank is still in formation, it hasn't spread out yet. Tormid rushed to report anxiously. Don't worry, the right flank has the Allies and the Legion's reserves, the source of the soldiers is the most mixed. The Devers rode on their horses and looked to the left. It was the end of autumn, it had not rained for more than 10 days, the land was dry, the movement of tens of thousands of soldiers had long stirred up dust, it was impossible to see the situation on the right flank. The Devers said with a rather leisurely expression, Triphias is not in a hurry to get into formation, but reorganizing the troops first, which makes me feel relieved. He pointed to the front. Look, Bertie's men are not moving on the grassy slope. I guess they are also in formation. It just gives us time to let the soldiers of the 1st Legion rest and recover a little strength. Tormid fixed his eyes on the front 500 meters away. It was also covered in dust. Go and inform Leds. The Devers ordered again. Let him send 7 or 8 cavalry units to harass the enemy's left, middle, and right flank, delay the speed of their formation, and at the same time observe their response. Come back and report to me. Yes. Wait a minute. Tell Leds I said to harass, not to fight. If the enemy cavalry catches up, immediately retreat, don't let the cavalry be injured. The Devers reminded again. Understood, sir. Boys, follow closely. Uncle, we can run faster than you even without horses. Brat, are you itching for a beating? You'll see when we get back. Captain, you should have done this a long time ago. The cavalry unit led by Sarikos had already crossed the entire battlefield in a burst of laughter, and reached the Punit River. Stop. Sarikos placed his spear horizontally, and the entire unit stopped moving forward. Dismount. Why, Captain? We are not in front of the enemy's formation yet. The cavalry shouted. Obey the order. Sarikos roared. Although the cavalry was unwilling, they had to obey the military rules, but they shouted unhappily, Captain, the other units have already thrown their javelins at the enemy, do you want us to be deserters? Shut up. Our unit was ordered to harass the enemy's left flank, so we ran the longest distance. The horses are also a little tired, so let them rest for a while so that they can better complete their mission. I brought you out, so I will bring you back smoothly. All right, Captain, we will listen to you. But how long do we have to wait? Wait for my order. The cavaliers could only pat their agitated war horses lightly while observing the dusty battlefield in front of them. They watched as their comrades in the distance charged into the dust and retreated from time to time. The screams and cries of pain reached their ears, and it made their hearts itch. Time passed really slowly. Just when they were getting impatient, Sarikos shouted, Get on the horses! Like rain after a long drought, they were instantly energized. The 50 war horses began to trot, gradually forming a wedge as they moved forward. Sarikos was at the forefront, and he raised his spear and waved it forward twice. Speed up! There was a 30-meter high grassy slope in front of them. Although it was not steep, they had to prevent the cavalry from slowing down when going up the slope and being attacked by the enemy. The war horses' 4 hooves moved quickly, and the cavalry held the horses' necks tightly and leaned forward to speed up the war horses' speed. Sarikos was the first to jump up the grassy slope. A few dozen meters away, there was a dense crowd of Briti people stretching out from the bank of Punit River. 1 row, 2 rows, 3 rows. It was difficult to count how thick their phalanx was in a hurry. Sarikos felt like he was standing in front of the enemy, like an ant standing in front of an elephant. There was a huge invisible pressure on his chest, making it hard for him to breathe. He took a deep breath, took out a short javelin, and squeezed his legs on the horse's belly, and the war horse accelerated again. The cavalry followed closely behind. 50 meters, 40 meters, 30 meters. The hooves of the horses landed on the dry and cracked soil, like drumsticks hitting the surface of a drum. Da-da-da-da. The sound, coupled with the cavalry's rapid charge, created a lot of noise, causing chaos in the Briti formation that had just been set up. Just as the Briti warriors were pushing each other and screaming, Sarikos threw the javelin in his hand, and then dozens of javelins plunged into the enemy's formation, and screams rang out one after another. The Briti people became even more chaotic, some retreated in panic, and some rushed forward angrily. Sarikos swung his spear to the left, and the cavalry quickly turned left when they were more than 20 meters away from the enemy's formation, galloping forward along the front of the Briti formation. Everywhere they went was like a stone thrown into calm water, and the ripples would not calm down in a short time. At the same time, the enemy's panic and confusion were reflected in Sarikos's eyes. He felt that his mission had been completed, and decisively ordered, "Turn left." As soon as the cavalry turned back, the Briti cavalry arrived, and they chased after them. The Dionia light infantry arrived in time to provide support, and used javelins to scare away hundreds of Briti cavalry. Chapter 327. The Devers placed the Allied forces and reserve forces on the right flank, the 1st Legion on the middle, and the 2nd Legion on the left flank. They wanted to use their strongest force to break through from the outside and finally achieve their goal of surrounding the enemy. With that in mind, the Devers said to Leds, "Thank you for your hard work, Cavalry Brigade. Let the brothers retreat to the rear and have a good rest." Leds hurriedly said, "Sir Devers, the enemy has 500 to 600 cavalry on the right flank. If we retreat to the rear, who will deal with them? They have their own people to deal with them. You cavalry have to give the enemy a fatal blow at the critical moment. Before that, let your men recover their strength and horsepower." The Devers explained, unmoved. Leds helplessly retreated. The Devers immediately asked Tormid to call Epicthenus and Xpit over. He said with a serious expression, "When the enemy attacks, I want you to lead the light infantry and freedmen to attack the enemy's right flank from a distance. At the same time, you have to repel the enemy's cavalry and light infantry. This is a difficult task. Can you do it? When we were in Persia, we fought with Persia's cavalry and archers many times and defeated them. Will the Briti cavalry be stronger than the Persia cavalry?" Epicthenus said confidently, "The Hades will protect us." Xpit sincerely chanted. The Devers looked at the two men's determined eyes and gave them a solemn and powerful military salute. "I will wait for the news of your victory." After sending the two off, the Devers' deployment was fully in place. All that was left was to wait for the British attack. At this moment, Marcius and Bagalipi's nephew, Rodum, came over and asked for instructions. "Sir, the Abyssinia leaders, Brim and Krelu, insist on seeing you." The Devers looked back at the two Abyssinia leaders, who were blocked by the guards outside, and were shouting. He immediately dismounted and strode over. "Consul of Dionia, we Abyssinia strongly request to face the enemy at the front instead of hiding in the back like coward. This is an insult to us soldiers." Brim shouted in agitation. "Insult?" After listening to Oedipus's translation, the Devers looked doubtfully at Tormid, who had followed him. "I've patiently spoken to Brim leader many times, but he doesn't seem willing to accept the idea of being a reserve force," Tormid hurriedly explained. After hearing that, Diver's expression immediately turned serious. He said coldly, "Since the Abyssinian warriors are already Dionians, you must know that Dionian soldiers must obey the orders of their superiors unconditionally. If you can't do that, then please leave with your soldiers. Let us, the real Dionia soldiers, enjoy the glory of victory alone. That's all." After that, he threw another sentence to Oedipus. "Translate it as it is." He then turned around and left. Tormid followed behind, looking back from time to time. In the end, he saw Brim and Krerus leave angrily. "Sir, aren't you afraid that the Abyssinia people will leave in anger by saying that?" Tormid asked worriedly. The Devers smiled. "The more you explain to some stubborn people, the more they will ask for more. It's better to cut off their thoughts from the start. Moreover, even if the Abyssinia people leave, it won't affect our victory." Tormid was skeptical. He secretly sent messengers to observe the movements of the Abyssinia troop. In the end, He found that after Brim went back, he led his troops obediently and waited at the back without making a fuss. He could not help but feel ashamed. After dealing with many mercenary leaders for more than 10 years, his understanding of human nature was not as good as a 20-year-old youth. Only a favored person could explain this. Due to the harassment of the Dionia cavalry, it was almost afternoon when the Briti people finished their formation. Penland saw that the warriors were no longer as excited as they were at the beginning. They were a little anxious. He knew his people too well. The Briti people lived in the gap between the two forces of the Greeks and the Lucanians. These warriors lived freely in the mountains and on the highland. They were brave but timid, passionate but self-abased. The key was to inspire their fighting spirit. Therefore, he led his personal guards out on horseback and came to the front of the center of the formation. The personal guards shouted in unison to attract the attention of thousands of warriors. Then he shouted, "Briti people, my dear compatriots, for hundreds of years we have lived freely on this beautiful highland. Amara gave birth to us with her sweet body, and Brutus gave us peace. And now our peace has been broken. Our land is being invaded. Who is occupying our town? Who is killing our people? The Dionia people. Damn the Greeks!" The warriors began to respond angrily. "Are we going to let these evil foreigners occupy our land, destroy our temples, rape our women, turn our children into slaves, lose their freedom, and live like cattle and sheep?" Penland and his personal guards shouted together. "No." The warriors in front of him responded angrily. This response gradually spread throughout the formation. "No!" 20,000 Briti warriors shouted in unison. "Defeat the Dionia people and give us back our freedom." Penland raised his spear high. "Kill them! Kill them!" Thousands of warriors roared hysterically. Roar! 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 They kept poking the ground with their spears, and their fighting spirit rose sharply. Penland was affected by this, and he also felt his blood boiling. Facing the warriors who couldn't hold back anymore, he pointed his spear forward and shouted, "Attack!" The trumpeter behind him blew the horn, and then horns sounded everywhere in the formation at the same time. Whoa! The Battle of Punit to determine the ownership of the Briti region began. Hearing the thunderous roar on the opposite side, Tormod couldn't help but ask, "Sir Devers, the Briti people are boosting the morale, shouldn't you also?" In a boxing match, the person who has the loudest voice will not win. The winner is often the calmest player. Besides, what the soldiers need to do now is to block the enemy's attack. Yelling pointlessly will not only deplete their stamina, but it will also cause them to lose their defensive position because they are too excited, Divers said as he looked ahead. Tormod nodded in agreement. "The Briti people are attacking, sound the defense bugle." Hearing the sound of the horn on the opposite side, Devers began to order, and at the same time, he quickly passed through the gaps of the small phalanx with his personal guards and came to the back of the formation. More than a dozen curved bronze horns blew a low command, and the soldiers who were sitting and resting immediately picked up their guns and shields, stood up, and moved their somewhat numb hands and feet. The teammates moved closer to each other, and the somewhat loose formation was arranged more closely to meet the upcoming battle. The small phalanx in the front of the entire formation began to quickly connect with each other, and the middle and left wing of the Legion of Dionysia quickly connected with the right wing of the coalition army. On the other hand, Epthenis and Xpit led a total of 4,000 light infantry and freedmen, and walked from the outside of the left wing to the front. They each had their own tasks. Xpit led more than 2,500 people forward for 50 meters, then stopped, and the stone throwers, archers, and a few harpooneers lined up in order, while Epthenis led nearly 1,000 light shield bearers and harpooneers to continue to the outside of the left wing, and as they walked, they became a lengthened column, almost out of the battlefield. Amidst the sound of the horn, the Briti people's long front line, which stretched for nearly 8 miles, did not leave any reserve troops, and slowly moved forward together. The Briti people evenly distributed their light infantry in the front of the formation, and the majority of the light infantry were archers. The Briti people were rich in archers because of the high mountains, dense forests, and high plateaus with many wild beasts. After the light infantry were the infantry. Most of them were spearmen with leather shields and spears. On the far right wing were 600 unarmored cavalry. Although the Briti people occupied the entire plateau, they used this valuable land mainly to graze cattle and sheep to feed their large population. Although they also raised some horses, they were mainly pack horses. There were not many people who owned war horses, and they were mainly concentrated among the tribal nobles. 600 cavalry was almost the maximum number that the Briti people could gather. As soon as the Briti people walked down the grassy slope, their right wing was baptized by the flying stones of the Dionia stone throwers. The infantry continued to move forward slowly with their leather shields, and were still far from the Dionia formation, so they could not charge too early. However, the Briti light infantry had already begun to gallop, and their responsibility was to clear the obstacles for the main force. The Briti cavalry on the far right had already begun to accelerate. When the battle began, according to tradition, it was always the cavalry on the two flanks who fought first because they were the fastest. The previous attack by the Dionia cavalry could be said to be a slap in the face, and now they were going to fight back. The cavalrymen shook the reins and clamped their horses' bellies repeatedly, increasing the speed of their war horses. The feeling of galloping at top speed made their blood boil. They could clearly see that the enemy's cavalry was 300 meters behind the light infantry. First break up the light infantry in front, and then attack the enemy cavalry that did not move. Their chances of winning were quite high. The cavalry leader who was charging at the front was calculating in his heart, and from the corner of his eyes, he saw a lot of figures appeared tens of meters away on the right, and they were running quickly towards the cavalry. The leader immediately felt uneasy, and before he could react, countless javelins flew 30 meters away and landed among the galloping cavalry. In an instant, people screamed and horses neighed. In a high-speed run, whether it was a man or a horse, once they were hit by a spear and rolled to the ground, not only would it be difficult to survive, but it would also affect the charging cavalry around them. Chapter 328. The Briti cavalry slowed down, and once they stopped, they became an easy target. In the dust, the cavalrymen were terrified. Not only did they have to guard against the enemy's javelins, but they also had to be careful not to trip over their fallen comrades. Seeing that the cavalrymen behind them were in chaos, the cavalrymen who had rushed to the front had to turn back under the leadership of their leader and charge at the Dionia light infantry to save their comrades from their predicament. Epiphanes soon learned of the enemy's attack. Not only did he not evacuate the soldiers, but he led some of the light shield-bearers to meet the enemy. He knew very well that the cavalry charge was not the spears in the hands of the cavalrymen, but the running war horse. If it collided with the unprotected light infantry, it would either result in broken bones or serious injuries. In fact, a dense spear formation was the best way to stop the cavalry charge, but the light infantry did not have this condition and had no time to prepare. In the face of the aggressive Briti cavalry, he and the battle-hardened former Thracian light shield-bearers unhurriedly put the leather ropes on the javelins. "Throw!" Epiphanes roared and threw the javelin in his hand with all his might. The javelin flew flat and straight, and in the blink of an eye, it pierced deep into the neck of the war horse in front of him. The war horse neighed miserably and immediately threw the cavalryman off its back. With this round of throwing by the light shield-bearers, the people in front of them were thrown off their feet. Instead of looking at the effect of the throwing, they quickly took out the reverse blades at their waists, raised the leather shields in their left hands, and half squatted on the ground. Aiming at the enemy cavalry that was already in front of them, they nimbly rolled to the left and right. When it was too late to dodge, they would fall to the ground and curl up into a ball, using the leather shields to protect their heads and chests from the trampling of the horse's hoof. When they saw the opportunity, They would use the curved blades of the reverse blades to cut the legs of the horses, startling the war horse and throwing the cavalryman off. Just as the Brute cavalry was in trouble, the troops led by Xpit had already engaged the Brute light infantry. The crisscrossing arrows in the air were as dense as a thick dark cloud, and when they fell on both sides like a rain of arrows, they took away a lot of lives. After a few rounds, the Brute light infantry could not hold on any longer. After all of Dionia's archers were concentrated on the left flank. The number of archers was not comparable to Brute, who was evenly distributed among the light infantry. However, in the middle and right flank of the Dionia formation, the Brute light infantry could rain arrows on the Dionia soldiers at will. They could even throw javelins as close as 50 meters. The soldiers of the Legion of Dionysia erected a long shield wall, using thick copper shields and iron helmets to block the enemy's long-range attack. On the other hand, the team officers were shouting, "Hold on! Steady! Don't worry!" It was to prevent the soldiers from throwing the javelins in their hands impulsively. Not only would it easily alert the enemy, but it would also disrupt the overall defense of the troops and lead to unnecessary casualties. Fortunately, as the Brute light infantry got closer and closer, the light infantry had to retreat immediately. They quickly passed through the gaps between the infantry and retreated to the rear. Otherwise, they would be surrounded by the infantry and pushed to the front of the battle, facing the heavily armored Greek heavy infantry. The Brute infantry finally began to run. They roared as they charged towards the Dionian phalanx, who were ready for battle. Compared to the aggressive Brute light infantry, the Dionia soldiers were as calm as a mountain. They held the javelins in their hands and kept their eyes on the distance from the enemy. The officers shouted, "Javelins!" Dark clouds floated out from the left, middle, and right flank of the 7 to 8 miles long formation. The charging Brute light infantry was caught off guard, and the sharp tips of the javelins instantly took away the lives of hundreds and thousands of soldiers. However, the rain of javelins did not slow down the pace of the Brute light infantry. They stepped over the bodies of their comrades and advanced faster. Many Dionia soldiers did not have the time to throw a second javelin before they slammed into the shield wall of the Dionia formation. Countless cracks appeared on the shield wall. The Brute light infantry fearlessly rushed in, trying to widen the gap. The third and fourth rows of Dionia soldiers quickly raised their shields and used their javelins to force the enemy to retreat. For a moment, the shields of the soldiers on both sides collided, the spears clashed, the dust filled the air, and the battle cries shook the sky when the noon sun cast a shadow on the small sundial. Onatas, who was in charge of teaching Greek, announced that the morning class was over. When the children cheered, he said solemnly, "Children, when you go back, I hope you can memorize this poem by Hesiod. It's best if you can recite it. As for these new words that I teach, you must remember them. I will check them tomorrow. Do you remember them?" "Yes, teacher," the students answered in unison. "Especially you, Patroclus." Onatas pointed at the child sitting in the distance and reminded him, "This time, be more careful when you go back. I don't want to see you stand as a punishment tomorrow, understand?" Patroclus lowered his head in embarrassment. The students around him burst into laughter. Patroclus's terrible performance in Greek class was a stark contrast to his speed and accuracy in solving questions in mathematics class. Onatas left the classroom, and the students cheered and ran out. Stephos grabbed Patroclus's arm and urged, "Hurry up! Hurry up! If you delay any longer, they will all be snatched away." The two of them rushed out of the classroom. As soon as they turned a corner, they heard a cry of, "Ouch!" A little girl fell to the ground. "Hey, are you two blind?" Cynthia scolded. She bent down and asked with concern, "Jisha, are you okay?" "I am fine," Jisha answered weakly. Cynthia pulled her up and turned to glare at the two boys. "Hurry up and apologize. Otherwise, don't even think of leaving." Although Cynthia was the youngest, the two boys, who were extremely active in class, seemed to be very afraid of her. they hurriedly nodded and bowed. Sorry, Jisha, we were going. I am fine. Hurry up and go buy butterbread. If you are late, you will miss it. Jisha was not angry. Instead, she reminded them gently. The two boys were relieved and quickly ran away. Patroclus did not forget to look back at Cynthia as he ran, and then quickly looked away. Cynthia snorted. Jisha, you are so easy to talk to. If it were me, I would not let them off so easily. Jisha smiled softly and patted the dust off her body. Oh right. Come to my house for lunch today. Let's go eat real butterbread. Cynthia suddenly thought of something and invited her. When I left home this morning, my mother told me to bring you home at noon. Jisha did not say anything and nodded shyly. The afternoon in Turin Primary School was generally arranged for sports. The boys would do simple military training and football, while the girls would run, jump, and play some games. Therefore, there was not much free time at noon. Except for the children in Turin who had time to go home for lunch, the children who lived far away could only eat in the neighborhood. Fortunately, as the school's influence expanded, the number of students, teachers, guards, and other personnel increased, and merchants and vendors saw a business opportunity. They set up shops in the designated area outside the school, selling books, paper, stationery, clothes, food. The most famous one was the little restaurant built by the consul's wife, Christoia. She provided lunch to the students at a low price, and the students' favorite lunch was the restaurant's new butterbread. Every day, students and even teachers would line up to buy it, and the supply could not meet the demand. Cynthia and Jisha, as classmates in the same classroom, quickly became good friends. Cynthia invited Jisha to her house for the first time and was treated with great hospitality by Christoia. Especially after knowing that Jisha was the adopted daughter of the Dever's old comrade, the captain of the First Legion, and Senator Alexis of the Senate. Alexis had always lived in Amendola and did not move to Turin. Christoia warmly invited her to come to her house for lunch every day. Christoia's enthusiasm brought her closer to Cynthia as mother and daughter. The delta between the Croti River and the Cosini River was originally a settlement area for the city's slaves. It was a collection, storage, and purification area for stone and copper mines. Not only was the security poor, the environment was terrible, and a lot of slag was dumped into the two rivers every day. After the Devers came to Turin, they saw this situation and discussed with Cunigurata and Marigi many times on how to manage this area. In the end, they moved the public slave settlement area to the north of the main city of Turin, next to the military camp. Not only was it far away from the residential areas of Turin, but it was also monitored by the military camp. If there was any abnormality, they could immediately send troops to suppress it. At the same time, they moved the stone mine to the market next to the port, and the copper mine to the business park in Amendola at the beginning of the year, next to the Saraceno River, so that they could get enough skilled manpower and interact well with other mines. Most importantly, the Croti River and the Cosini River, which were related to the lives and health of thousands of people in Turin, were free of pollution. Then, the Devers planned this empty land as the cultural center of the entire Dionia Union. The Dionia School was established here, and the Dionia Academy, which represented the highest scientific and cultural level of the Union, was being built. It was already clear that Helps, the director of the Turin Hospital, would build a medical school in the academy. Mentadicels would also move the Mathematics Research Institute there. Ansitanos planned to set up a historical research group. Chapter 329. After lunch, Patroclus and Stephos went to the Temple of Nina in Athens, which was not far from the school. The temple was built by the local people to thank Athens for their great help in rebuilding the city of Turin. The original patron of Turin was Apollo. After the Peloponnesus War, Turin forcibly cut off relations with Athens and expelled the Turin of Athens. Since then, the number of people who came here to pray had decreased, and now there were only a few. The children liked to play rugby and soccer in the small square in front of the temple. In these sports, Patroclus was a little star, because at the age of 13, he was far stronger, faster, and more agile than the other children, so everyone liked to play with him. But these days, he and Stephos were not interested in playing. The two children were lying on the wall of the temple and throwing stones into the Cosini River. Stephos, I haven't seen my father for almost 2 months. Let me tell you, this is the first time I've been away from my father for such a long time. I wonder how he's doing now. Patroclus stared blankly at the rushing river. He was a little worried and complained last time I saw him. Last time, when the First Legion passed by Turin, the Devers didn't even let them go home. They left so fast, I tried to chase after them after class, but I couldn't catch up with them. Stephos laughed carelessly. I heard from my father that the requirements to be a soldier of the Legion are very strict, much stricter than the requirements of our school. If you break the rules, you will be spanked. Your father is afraid of being spanked, so of course he doesn't dare to come to see you. Patroclus glared at him. I don't think you are worried about your father. Stephos stopped throwing stones into the river and reminded him loudly, I told you, Amyntas is not my biological father, but he is very good to me and my mother. He used to tell me stories about the battles he fought with the great Archon Devers in Persia, said Stephos, tilting his head to one side and thinking for a moment. He is a hero. I like him very much. I believe that nothing will happen to him, because the battle commanded by the great Devers consul has never failed. His optimism infected Patroclus. You're right. The Legion of Dionysia is invincible. At this time, a child ran into the temple excitedly. Good news! Good news! Proclus, what good news has made you so happy? The children stopped playing and looked at him. Cheer up, students. Under the leadership of my father, Legio III annihilated the invading Picasus army. Proclus shouted excitedly. Is this true? Patroclus asked hurriedly. Of course it's true. Proclus raised his head. If you don't believe me, go to the city of Turin. The whole city is cheering. No one doubts this victory, but the main reason for this victory is the command of the Devers consul. Stephos saw Proclus' excited expression and remembered that there was still no news from his adoptive father. He could not help but interject. Proclus was speechless for a moment. He glared at Stephos and could not help but shout, Anyway, it was my father who commanded the troops in the Grimentum. What is your father doing now? This time it was Stephos' turn to be speechless. Just as the two of them were arguing, the other children were already cheering. Great victory! Long live Dionia! Long live the Legion! The cheering children began to line up according to the military movements taught by the instructor and played a triumphal game. Proclus and Stephos were pulled into the team by Patroclus. But soon, the two of them began to argue about who should be the flag bearer. At the same time, in the Senate of Turin, the Senate was discussing the affairs of the Union of Dionia. The rotating chairman, Marigi, took out a scroll of papyrus and said, The governor of Cremissa, Sir Scombras, sent a document saying that he has thought of many ways, but there are still many people in Cremissa who are unwilling to subscribe to the wheat bonds. So far, the bonds allocated to several other cities have been sold out, including Esprustum. Only Cremissa, Marigi raised his voice. It was originally allocated the least, but not even half of the shares have been sold. Do you think we should bring the rest of the bonds back to Castellan? Amicus has already sent people to say several times, the citizens of Castellan are eager to subscribe to our bonds. Agreed. I have no objections. Borrowing 100 caddies of wheat and paying back 115 caddies in a year, that's a huge profit. Dionia did not take advantage of the citizens at all, so why are there so many people in Cremissa who are unwilling to subscribe? We should think carefully about the reason behind it. Cunigurata reminded everyone. As soon as this was said, most of the senators looked at Antalis. He looked rather embarrassed, and quickly coughed a few times, stood up and said, Sirs, I I think there are a few reasons. First of all, Cremissa is the latest to join the Union of Dionia, and it has only been half a year since then. Most importantly, it is different from Asprustum. At this point, he calmed his emotions, cleared his throat, and solemnly said, "Although it is hard to tell the truth, it is the truth. The outbreak of the war with Crotone was not caused by the people of Dionia, but many people in Cremissa think that Dionia should bear some responsibility. Many people in Cremissa died in the war with Dionia, and half a year is not enough to resolve the resentment in their hearts. With resentment, naturally, they will not be able to fully trust Dionia." Antally's words caused a brief silence. After a while, Cornelius said in a low voice, "The war with Crotone was inevitable. Although Cremissa has become a part of Dionia, it seems that we still need to do more to resolve the grief in the hearts of the people of Cremissa. I also hope that Lord Antalles, Lord Euripides, and Lord Pryades can provide more help. Whether it is as a member of the Senate or as a citizen of Cremissa, this is what we should do." Euripides said firmly, "I believe that it will not be long before the people of Cremissa feel fortunate and proud to be citizens of Dionia." Euripides' words were unanimously agreed with by the senators. At this moment, Pollux stood up and said, "Respected senators, we were just talking about the issue of wheat bonds. It reminds me of what Lord Mercies once said, the military rations exchanged from the people can at most last for more than 2 months. Am I right, Lord Mercies?" Although Mercies hated Pollux, he had to nod and said, "Yes, I did say that. But, thank you." Pollux loudly interrupted Mercy's words and quickly said, "Even if we have seized Abyssinia, but the Bruttii is such a large area with a population of more than 100,000. I'm afraid it will be very difficult to conquer it in just 2 months. More importantly, while we are concentrating on dealing with the people of Bruttii, the people of Lucaria in the north are also taking the opportunity to cause trouble. Now, does the Senate have any good way to deal with Bagul, his lordship's heavy injuries, and we don't know if he's dead or alive, and Picossus's large-scale attack on Grimentum?" When Pollux said this, he looked sympathetically at Vespa and Hemont. Although he hated these barbarians who sneaked into the Senate, he needed these staunch supporters of the Devers to doubt the young man. "No, because all the soldiers are fighting with the people of Bruttii. If this goes on, I'm afraid that before we conquer the Bruttii area, the people of Picossus will have already taken over the Grimentum and invaded our Nudum. When that time comes, our Dionia alliance will be attacked by enemies from both sides, and our army will also be facing a shortage of rations. A great disaster will befall the Dionia alliance. My lords, please think about it seriously. Such a terrible situation is very likely to happen." Polyxus cried out in anguish. A few of the senators' expressions changed, and some were deep in thought. Seeing this scene in front, Marigi cursed in his heart. "This damn Pollux has only been quiet for a few days, and now he's out to cause trouble again." In order to keep the Devers' plan to lure the people of Lucania a secret, only Avenogis, Cesta, Hieronymus, and the main officers of Legio III knew about it. Marigi, who did not know about it, anxiously winked at Plesinus, hoping that he would stand up and refute Pollux. "We're too warlike. After repelling the Crotone, we quickly attacked the Grimentum. A few days after helping Tarentum, we launched a war against the people of Bruttii. Our crazy expansion has caused uneasiness in the surrounding forces, and they will join forces to deal with us. The attack of Picossus is just a precursor. For the long-term security of Dionia, we should think about it and formulate some laws to restrain this practice of waging war at will." Pollux's words did not mention the Devers, but anyone could tell that these words were obviously aimed at the Devers. The great assembly hall suddenly became very quiet. At this moment there was a bang, and the sound of the door being opened was particularly clear in the quiet enclosed space. Felicius looked excited and quickly walked into the hall. Chapter 330. "My apologies, my lords." Felicius bowed slightly, unable to hide the joy on his face, and said excitedly, "I was in the Ministry of Military Affairs to meet the messenger from Legio III, so I came late." He brought good news. Felicius looked around at the elders and said loudly, "Legio III has defeated Picassus and the rebels of Grimentum outside the city of Grimentum. Apart from a few who escaped, most of them were captured, and Legio III only suffered a few dozen casualties. Commander Hieronymus is leading the army towards Picassus. According to reports, the city is empty of troops, and taking down Picassus is only a matter of time." The meeting hall suddenly erupted. "That's great! This is really a glorious victory. Picassus, we are finally going to have a coastal city that truly belongs to us on the west coast." The elders, who were frightened by the scene described by Pollux, burst into cheers like never before. Polixus looked at these cheering elders, dumbfounded, and for a moment, he did not recover from the sudden reversal. After a long time, he said unwillingly, "I didn't expect that Hieronymus could also create a great victory like Lord Devers, no." Felicius corrected him loudly. In fact, this victory was planned in advance by Lord Devers and Legio III, and they also received help from the two allies, Laus and Elia. Otherwise, how could they win so easily? Oh! Cunigarata, Cornelis, and the others had an expression as if it was only natural, and then they asked about the details of the battle with interest. Polixus did not say anything. The Battle of Punate River had lasted for more than an hour, and the battle line between the two sides had changed from the initial straight line to an arc-shaped crescent. On the right flank of the Dionysian army, the troops led by Tryphias were still in their original positions. The left wing of the Briti tribe, consisting of a dozen Briti warriors, could not effectively unite into a unified force to maintain the pressure on the right wing of the Dionia tribe. In the middle of Dionia, Vig and Baelia and some of Cosenza's warriors attacked fiercely. After a period of stalemate, the First Legion's phalanx began to gradually retreat, causing the entire middle road to cave in. The proud soldiers of the First Legion had indeed done their best, but the long period of constructing the camp had consumed too much of their stamina. After putting on their heavy armor, they were already a little exhausted and couldn't do as they wished. On the left flank of Dionia, the Second Legion and Cosenza's warriors were still engaged in a fierce battle. The soldiers of Cosenza had washed away the humiliation of their previous failure in attacking the city. Relying on the superhuman endurance they had honed from living in the highlands since young, in the words of later generations, Highlanders had a lot of red blood cells and high oxygen capacity. As well as their larger physiques than the Greeks, they maintained a high-intensity attack for a long period of time. The Second Legion maintained a balance of power by relying on their solid defense and full cooperation between the brigade. On the far left was the only place where Dionia had an absolute advantage. The light shield-bearers led by Epitines dealt heavy damage to the Briti cavalry from the very beginning. In the close combat, the Briti cavalry suffered a lot from the experienced light shield-bearers of Dionia. If this was not a battle of life and death for the Briti, the cavalry leader would have led the rest of the cavalry to flee. However, in order to prevent the light shield-bearers of Dionia from supporting other battlefields, he led his men to distance themselves from the light shield-bearers of Dionia. He used the cavalry's speed to wander around the periphery and launch surprise attacks on the Dionia light infantries that had separated themselves from the formation. However, the javelins and bows of the Dionia were not to be trifled with. The number of Briti cavalry was still decreasing little by little. On the other hand, the light infantry led by Xpit ran into some trouble. Although the Briti light infantry could not compare to Dionia in terms of both quantity and ability, the furious Briti light infantry gave up on long-range attacks after suffering from the enemy. Instead, they rushed forward and engaged Xpit's troops in close combat with javelins and daggers. Xpit could have retreated and widened the distance. This was the tactic of light infantry. However, Kspit, who had followed the Devers for a long time, knew that the sudden retreat of his light infantry and freedmen would expose Epetini's flanks. This would cause the light shield-bearers to suffer heavy losses. Therefore, Kspit did not retreat. Instead, he braced himself and engaged the Briti light infantry in close combat. He had few light shield-bearers to begin with. The freedmen's arrows and javelins could still deal with them, but they would not be able to hold out against the fierce Briti in close combat. Fortunately, the Devers still had many cards up their sleeve. When he heard that the leftmost troops were in trouble, he quickly sent a scouting team to the mountain ridge. These lightly armored soldiers with leather shields and daggers sprinted all the way to the leftmost. They immediately joined the battle and quickly turned the situation around. Amidst the dust, a messenger cavalryman galloped towards the Devers at the back of the formation. Tormid hurriedly went up to him. "Commander, Capus has sent someone to inform you of an emergency. The soldiers of the 1st Legion can't hold out any longer. They're so tired that they can't even lift their bronze shields." Tormid reported to the Devers as soon as he received the news. "It seems like the 1st Legion has reached the limits of their stamina," the Devers concluded. "It's not just the 1st Legion. Dracos has also sent someone to report that some of the soldiers of the 2nd Legion are starting to feel dizzy and weak. They don't even dare to order for the front and rear troops to switch, afraid that there will be chaos," Tormid reminded. "Our soldiers are already so tired. No matter how strong the British stamina is, I'm afraid they won't be any better." The Devers stared ahead. Dust was flying everywhere in front of them. Shadows of people could be seen, and the sounds of killing could be heard. However, he seemed to have seen the opportunity to win. "Quickly inform the 2 Abyssinia leaders, Broom and Grim. Didn't they say that they wanted to go into battle? Now is the chance. I want them to lead the Abyssinia soldiers to the left flank immediately and attack the enemy's flank. Use the most ferocious attack to defeat Cosenza's people and show us the power of the Abyssinia soldiers." "Yes," Tormid replied excitedly. At the same time, Led's cavalry should have had enough rest. Let them immediately go to help Epetines and Kspit. After defeating the enemy's cavalry and light infantry, turn around and head north, cross the battlefield, and attack the enemy's middle and rear. Together with the 1st Legion, we'll crush them in one fell swoop." The Devers clenched his right fist and swung it down heavily. "Understood, Commander." Tormid led the 2 messengers on a horse and rode to the left. He was going to give the order personally. The Devers turned to look at the 2 troops that had not participated in the battle yet. They were just blurry shadows a few miles away and could not be seen at all. After a while, Tormid rushed back. "They've already moved out. Blow the horn to attack." The Devers immediately ordered. Beat, beat, beat. The loud horn drowned out the noise of the battle and spread throughout the entire formation. "It's the attack. Hold on, brothers. Our reserve troops are moving out." Xantiparis heard the horn and perked up. Before the battle, the Devers had told the 2 Legion commanders about his battle plan, and the 2 Legion commanders had conveyed the Devers' tactical intentions to the captains, company captains, and platoon captains. Therefore, the 1st and 2nd Legions could still hold on in such a passive situation because the officers were confident. Now, the horn to attack had finally arrived. "Beat the drums! Beat the drums!" Xantiparis shouted the order in a hoarse voice. The drums sounded and the military flag pointed forward. Although the soldiers were physically tired, their spirits were lifted. All the captains of the 1st and 2nd Legions were doing almost the same thing as Xantiparis. When the horn reached Penland's ears, he was in the right wing of the Briti Legion, pushing forward with the soldiers. Although every step was difficult, the Cosenza soldiers were advancing. The Dionia soldiers are almost at their limit. This thought flashed through Penland's mind. Although he was a little tired, the desire for victory urged him to work harder. At this moment, the horn of Dionia shocked him. Could it be that the enemy had reinforcements? A sense of urgency surged in his heart. He could not understand the overall situation in the formation, so he could only speed up the attack to defeat the enemy in front of him. Descendants of Brutus, work harder. The enemy is almost at their limit. He shouted, and the guards around him followed suit, thus influencing the other soldiers. The Cosenza soldiers used their remaining strength to attack desperately. However, the defense of the Second Legion was also greatly enhanced. Instead, it was more difficult for the Briti Legion to advance in the middle and right wing. Under the leadership of Broom and Krelu, more than 2,000 Abyssinia soldiers, who had been holding back for more than an hour and had nowhere to vent their energy, ran all the way. They went around the outside of the two armies, roared, and fiercely pounced on the rear of the right wing of the Briti Legion. The deafening battle cries and rumbling footsteps caused the Cosenza soldiers to look back in panic. Then they saw countless British soldiers, who were dressed similarly and had ferocious faces, waving their spears and killing them fiercely. "It's the Abyssinia! We're surrounded!" The Cosenza soldiers turned to defend in panic. Chapter 331. Defeat came so quickly that Pienland still could not believe it, because he felt that victory was so close to him. Attack! Continue to attack! The enemy is about to lose! He shouted hysterically, trying to stop the soldiers around him from escaping, but he was almost pushed down. "Great leader, run! If you don't leave now, you won't be able to!" The guards forcefully pulled him back. "Commander, we have won this battle!" Tormid came to report with a face full of joy. "The enemy is completely routed." This result was expected by Devers. He said calmly, "This battle is not over yet. It's not enough to just repel the enemy. We have to see what the final result is." Usually, in a head-on battle, the losing side rarely lost more than 10% of its soldiers. After the enemy fled, if the pursuit was appropriate, it would often increase the casualty rate of the losing side. This was because the defeated soldiers had no fighting spirit and no intention to fight back. Therefore, Devers kept the bugle blowing for the attack. The Dionia soldiers simply threw away their heavy bronze shields and helmets, held their spears with both hands, and continued to pursue the enemy regardless of their exhaustion. They cooperated with the reinforcements rushing from the side to surround the enemy. The Abyssinia soldiers, the light infantry and freedmen led by Eptines and Xpit, and the mountain scouts led by Izamu formed a big net from the right to the middle of the Briti army. Although this net was not very strong and the mesh was too big, it was enough to deter the Briti who only wanted to escape. In the midst of the battle cries of the Dionia, some of the defeated soldiers simply threw away their weapons and sat on the ground. The Leeds cavalry brigade, on the other hand, was extremely scattered and wide in two horizontal lines to pursue the fleeing enemy. The cavalry at full horsepower was like a thick hedge, sweeping the dead leaves back and forth. Near dusk, the Dionia cavalry stopped their pursuit. When they returned from the Cosenza plateau that was full of defeated soldiers, all of them were covered in blood. It was a frightening sight. Later, the meddlesome soldiers gave them the nickname Blood Cavalry, which eventually became their official name. At this time, the battle was over. At the cost of 1,500 casualties, Dionia caused the Briti alliance to suffer nearly 5,000 casualties and more than 5,000 prisoners. Leeds excitedly came to see Devers, only to be told that the commander had gone to the crematorium. Walking on the corpse-strewn battlefield, the joy of Devers' victory had long disappeared. The soldiers placed their fallen comrades neatly on the grass. At first glance, they couldn't even see the end of them. They carefully stuck 2 opal on the dead man's eyes, and at the same time, they prayed to Hades with tears in their eyes. Looking at the pale faces that seemed familiar, Devers' footsteps were a little heavy. Finally, he stopped. A dozen soldiers were crying around a corpse on the side of the road in front of him. He happened to know the leader of the group. It was Septimus, the company captain of the Second Legion. Devers' heart skipped a beat. He stepped forward and asked in a low voice, "Who is the dead?" "Commander." The officer and the soldiers hurriedly saluted when they saw him. Through the gap, he saw the face of the dead man. It was a face that could not be more familiar. Arsenis, a passionate and cheerful young man from Amendola. He was a hero of the Second Crotone War and a standard-bearer during the triumphal parade. During the final attack of the battle, Arsenis, as the platoon leader, rushed to the front. As a result, he was stabbed in the chest by a daring enemy who was not in a hurry to escape. Hearing Septimus' words of grief, Devers took 2 opals from the soldiers and placed them on Arsenis' closed eyelids. A year ago, this brave young man had dared to compete with him in swimming. Now, his body was as cold as a stone. At this moment, Devers hoped that Hades really existed in this world. Based on Dionia's reverence for the Pluto, they would definitely give these soldiers of Dionia preferential treatment in hell. After coming out of the group of soldiers, Devers walked forward for a while. Then, he stopped and looked gloomily at the burning incineration furnaces in the distance. After a long time, he said to Tormid, who had been silently following behind him, "Do you think Dionia's war against Brity, was it right or wrong?" Tormid did not know how to answer for a moment. However, Devers's expression quickly became firm. He answered himself in a firm tone, "Of course it was right. In this era, it's either we destroy others or others destroy us. There's no other way but to strengthen ourselves." Tormid agreed with Devers. In the eastern Mediterranean, he had seen the oppression of the weak races by the Persia, and the tyranny of the Sparta in Ionia and Asia Minor. After coming to the western Mediterranean, he had also heard of the strength of Carthage and the tyranny of Syracuse. What he did not expect was that at this moment, what Devers was worried about was a Latin city-state in central Italy that he had never heard of, Rome. "Commander, the brothers of the 1st Legion and the soldiers of the reserve team are seizing the time to rest. They're too tired. They almost fell asleep as soon as they fell to the ground. They didn't even have time to take off their breastplates," Capus said with some heartache. "In this battle, whether it's the 1st Legion, the 2nd Legion or the other teams, they've all put in their best efforts. The battle was very difficult," Devers said with a sigh, but he still reminded Capus, "However, it's autumn now. I heard that the nights in the mountains are much colder than in Turiae. After the fierce battle, the brothers will fall asleep when they're sweating all over. Be careful not to catch a cold. Now our medical camp is overcrowded. I don't want any unnecessary increase in the number of injured and sick." Next to Devers was Antonio Rios. He was once again the military officer of the army in this expedition. Obviously, he was somewhat familiar with this position. At this time, he suggested, "I think we can let the auxiliary soldiers in the supply camp take out the blankets carried by the soldiers of the 1st Legion and cover themselves." Devers nodded in agreement. He looked at Dracos again. The commander of the 2nd Legion had his head slightly lowered, his hands behind his back, and his left leg was trembling slightly. Devers looked at him carefully and asked, "Can our camp be built by night?" "The brothers of the 2nd Legion are taking the prisoners to speed up the construction. At the same time, the Mountain Brigade, the soldiers of Abyssinia, and the allied forces led by Sir Tryphias and Sir Gorkys, the general of Castellan, are also building the camp under the guidance of the engineers. It will definitely be built before night falls." Tryphias and Gorkys nodded after Dracos mentioned their names. Devers expressed his gratitude to them and then asked, "How are the Brity prisoners doing?" "We severely punished more than a dozen prisoners who dared to resist. With the Abyssinia as an example, they're quite obedient." Devers nodded. He paced back and forth a few steps and said in a low voice, "Don't torture them. If you find that the Brity can't carry on working, allow them to stop and rest." "Oh, you know the specifics yourself." "Yes. What's with the injury on your right hand?" Dracos was only thinking about how to complete the task given by Devers and did not notice that Devers had walked behind him. He hurriedly retracted his hand, took 2 steps back, shook his head and said, "No. It's nothing. I was accidentally injured by a soldier's spear. He shook his head, and a bloody groove under his lower jaw was reflected in Devers's eyes. Devers, who was respected by Herpes as his teacher, knew that the wound was near the vital carotid artery. One could imagine the thrill of the situation and Dracos's luck at that time. At this moment, Devers's face darkened. You rushed to the front again, didn't you? How many times have I told you? You are the commander of more than 7,000 soldiers, not an ordinary soldier. If you die in battle, do you know how much impact it will have on the entire battle? Dionia's military law is just child's play to you, isn't it? If you don't want to abide by it, then don't. Devers scolded Dracos. He hung his head and did not dare to say a word. In the eyes of outsiders, a young man scolding a strong man in his 30s like a father scolding a child was a somewhat comical scene. But the senior generals and important figures of Dionia around them all looked serious and tried to hold their breath. This showed the power of Devers. Temporarily hand over the command of the 2nd Legion to Adriang. You immediately go to Stesichordas, the head of the medical camp of the expeditionary troops and one of Herpes's right-hand men. Bandage your wound and go to the military judge to receive punishment. As soon as Devers finished speaking, Dracos repeatedly answered yes and ran away as if he had been pardoned. Commander, actually, during the last attack, the soldiers were very tired. Dracos also wanted to use this method to encourage the soldiers. Antonio and the other 4 explained on behalf of Dracos in a low voice. You should all know Arsenies. After the 2nd victory against Crotone, he was the flag-bearer at the triumphal parade. Now he is a platoon leader of the 2nd Legion, a very promising young officer. Devers let out a long sigh. I've just paid the crossing fee to Garin for him. Whatever the Legion commander does, the lower-ranked officers will follow suit. I don't want to see the positions of the 2nd Legion's officers always empty. This Dracos who does not care about his life in battle needs to be taught a lesson. Chapter 332. After Devers calmed himself down, he asked, Capus, the 1st Legion is responsible for taking care of the Briti captives at night, right? Yes. Try to make them as comfortable as possible without letting them escape. Capus hesitated for a moment and said, I'll try my best. You have to know, although they were enemies before, after this battle. It's certain that the Briti will become one of us soon. In order to make this transition process smoother and not increase hatred, we have to work hard. Devers patiently explained to Capus. War had always been a continuation of politics. Devers' position determined that he had to look further and consider more comprehensively. Tryphias and Gorkys, who were at the side, looked at each other. The continued growth of the Dionia alliance should be a good thing for Heraclea and Castellan. In a while, I might send someone to help you appease these Briti captives. However, I'm not sure if he's willing to help. Devers rubbed his chin and muttered. Capus was curious about the person Devers was talking about, but he didn't ask. How's the situation at the medical camp? Devers thought of another question. There are too many wounded. Stesichordas and the others are so busy that they don't have time to rest. Now it's Epithenes who is sending light infantry and freedmen to help the medical camp carry the wounded. Antonio said worriedly. In other words, no one is taking care of the Briti soldiers? Devers' eyes widened. He immediately thought of the seriousness of the problem. Antonios, go find Stesichordas immediately and tell him that it's my order. He has to send 1 or 2 doctors no matter what. At the same time, let the 1st Legion send 1,000 infantrymen as support. First, do simple debridement, bandaging, and other treatment for the wounded Briti soldiers. All right. Antonius quickly turned around and left. Also, Talmud, I'll write 2 letters immediately. Get the messenger to bring the letters back to Talii as soon as possible. Hand them over to Herpes and Merces. I want them to send as many doctors and nurses as possible, as well as more medicinal ingredients, medical supplies, and food. After the generals had completed their assigned tasks, Devers finally had the time to face Tryphias and Gorkys alone. "Sirs, I'm so sorry. I didn't expect so many things to happen after we won this battle. Sorry to keep you waiting." "It's nothing," Tryphias praised seriously. "You've given me a chance to witness the extraordinary management ability of the Consul of Dionia. Moreover, I really didn't expect that there would be so many things to deal with after a battle. The treatment of the wounded, the handling of the captives, the construction of the camp, the arrangement of the sentries. I really learned a lot of military knowledge." Tryphia's words came from the bottom of his heart, and Gorkys, who was next to him, felt the same. Indeed, the battles of the Greek city-states in this era were mostly near the territory of the Alliance. The requirements for logistics were not high, so they did not pay much attention to it. Only strong states like Athens, Sparta, and Syracuse, because they needed to fight outside for a long time, would have higher requirements for military logistics. Even so, from time to time, there would be situations where the soldiers were short of food and pay. Devers felt that the logistics of the Dionysian army was still relatively rough and imperfect, but in the eyes of Tryphias and the others, it was already a very complicated arrangement. Therefore, Devers just smiled and said, "This battle is all thanks to the full support of Heraclea and Castellan. With this victory, I believe that the war with Brutty will soon end. At that time, the clerk of our supply camp will carefully calculate the spoils of war and distribute them to you in proportion." Castellan had cooperated with Dionia 2 or 3 times, and Gorkys was very confident in the credibility of Dionia. Heraclea was relatively rich, and Tryphias was not very interested in the spoils of war. Of course, if he could get them, the citizens' trip would not be in vain, and they would not complain when they go back. He was more concerned about another matter. "Sir Devers, I also have a request." "Please say it. Can you let the officers of Dionia use your fighting style to help train the citizens of Heraclea?" Tryphias was a little embarrassed and explained, "Because during the battle, I found that the fighting style of Dionia is very different from that of Heraclea and Castellan. This difference in the battle affects the cooperation between the various troops, so, in fact, at the beginning of the battle, it was the 3,000 Dionia reserves who resisted the charge of Brutty and played the role of the mainstay of the right wing in the subsequent battle. If the reserves were like this, the strength of the Legion of Dionysia could be imagined. This was the reason why Tryphias made up his mind and made the request. Devers was surprised on the surface, but he was overjoyed. Finally, an allied city-state made such a request. He pretended to be hesitant and asked, "Will the Senate of Heraclea agree to this?" "I'll get them to agree," Tryphias said firmly. "In that case, when the war with Brutty is over, I will let the military officer Felicius discuss the training with you." Devers said half-jokingly, "Sir Tryphias, but the military training of Dionia is very strict. You have to prepare the citizens of Heraclea in advance." With Heraclea as an example, Gorkys did not want to be left behind and made the same request to Devers. After sending off Tryphias and Gorkys, although Devers felt very tired, he could not rest yet because there was someone he had to meet. "Go and bring the important figure of Brutty that Led's caught." Sidorum regretted that he did not seriously pray to goddess Amara before the battle. As a result, he unfortunately tripped and fell off his war horse. Then, his personal guards were scattered by the fleeing soldiers. He struggled to get up from the injured war horse, but because he was dressed differently from the ordinary Brutty soldiers, he became the target of the pursuing Dionia cavalry. After he became a captive, he did not hide it and directly told them his name. Now, his hands were tied behind his back, and he was being escorted by the Dionia soldiers. From afar, he saw a shining military flag erected on the grassy slope. Hundreds of soldiers stood neatly in 2 rows, and a person sat under the military flag. That person should be the Consul Devers of Dionia. Sidorum thought to himself, and his footsteps unconsciously quickened. As they approached, the two of them looked at each other face to face. Sidorum was surprised at the young age of the Devers, while the Devers was surprised at how old Sidorum was. As far as he knew, the great leader of Vigo City was not even 50 years old. "Untie him," said the Devers first. Sidorum rubbed his wrist that was red from the rope and took another step forward. The Devers did not move. Sidorum raised his white eyebrows. "Aren't you afraid that I'll attack you?" The Devers smiled. "You can speak Greek, so it saves me the trouble of finding an interpreter. I don't want to look up to others, so you can sit down." His voice was not loud, but it had an irresistible force. Sidorum hesitated for a moment, then sat down reluctantly. Marcius, who was behind the Devers, let out a sigh of relief. "To answer your question," said the Devers slowly. Divers spoke unhurriedly. "First, I have brave guards, so it'll be difficult for you to succeed. Second, even if you succeed, not only will the plight of the Briti people not be resolved, the enraged Ionians will also bring unimaginable punishment to the people of this land." Sidorum snorted. "Aren't the Dionia invading our land, killing our people, and robbing our belongings? If I can beat up the leader who started the war, at least the Briti will be happy for a while." "Are the Briti the victims?" the Devers said sternly. "No. 4 decades, the Briti have never stopped attacking and looting the Greek cities. You have destroyed countless Greek families. Now we, the Greeks, are finally here to take revenge, but you feel wronged. What a joke. You Greeks are outsiders invading our land. Of course we will take it back," Sidorum retorted, unwilling to be outdone. "As far as I know, the Briti originally lived in the central part of Italy. You moved here more than 200 years ago, driving away the original residents of this land and settling down here. Now, you claim to be the owner of the land in southern Italy? Is this ignorance or arrogance?" "Or arrogance?" Davis sneered. "Bullshit!" Sidorum yelled angrily. "It seems that you really don't know. Fortunately, the Greeks had written and recorded things. The scholars of Thurii have collected records of the major events that happened here for hundreds of years. If you go to Thurii one day, you can see the detailed historical records of the Briti." The Devers had asked Ansitanos about the Briti in detail. So, when Sidorum saw the Devers' serious face, he seemed a little discouraged. "What are you going to do with us?" he asked. "Are you referring to the captive Briti, or the so-called Briti alliance?" "Of course it's us who were unfortunately captured," Sidorum said. "Although we lost the battle, as long as Pinlan and the others defend the city with all their strength, it will be difficult for you to break through the sturdy city of Cosenza, no matter how many soldiers you have. In the end, you can only retreat after running out of food." Chapter 333. He stretched out his hand and stopped Sidorum, who was about to speak again. "In this battle, the Briti suffered 5,000 casualties. With the help of the Abyssinia warriors, we have confirmed that most of them were Cosenza's people. At the same time, we also captured more than 5,000 people, and most of them were Cosenza's people. During the battle, Pinlan placed the main Cosenza warriors in the middle and right flank. The center of Dionia's counterattack was also on the enemy's right flank and middle, which led to this result. The other casualties and captives were also Vigor and Ambalia. In other words, the Briti Alliance's important power to maintain your rule and suppress other small tribes has been greatly weakened. As far as I know, the Cosenza people have forcibly placed many small tribes in the outer city of Cosenza. As long as I make the Bassinians promise these tribes freedom and even more benefits, the Bassinians will not be able to stop them. Do you think these tribes will take the opportunity to resist and help us capture Cosenza?" When Devers said this, Sidorum's body trembled. He lowered his head and did not speak. 2 days ago there was a riot in Cosenza. The words of this Dionia consul could really become a reality. In addition, after I lead the army to Cosenza, I will not attack the city immediately. I heard that Ambalia city is extremely simple. I only need to send 3 to 4,000 people, and I may be able to capture it easily. And Vigor City. When Devers mentioned the word vigor, Sidorum trembled again. How many warriors did you take from there? Do you think if I send 10,000 soldiers to Vigor, and with the help of Laos, can we capture Vigor City? Sidorum clenched his fists and gritted his teeth. His expression was painful, but he still did not say a word. After we capture Ambalia and Vigor, we will attack Cosenza. Oh, by the way, you must be wondering why I didn't attack Canopetia? Devers paused and continued, because Canopetia will soon be captured by Dionia Legio IV. You don't believe me? I think Canopetia must have asked for reinforcements from Cosenza because Canopetia's stone walls cannot withstand our ballistae and siege towers. Ballistae? Sidorum finally raised his head in confusion. Devers generously briefed him on the new siege weapons developed by Dionia. Sidorum's expression turned ugly. In his memory, Pienlin did not take the initiative to tell him about Canopetia, but he knew that Cosenza sent 2,000 reinforcements to Canopetia. He even objected to this to Pienlin, but Pienlin made a firm decision. This was completely unlike his usual style of doing things. According to various signs, he felt that what Devers said was most likely true. Pienlin already knew that Canopetia could not be defended, but he was afraid that British people would panic, so he chose to hide it and bet everything on this battle. Sidorum's heart turned cold, and he squeezed out a sentence while trembling. Does Dionia want to kill all the people of Brudi? Kill all? No, we Dionia are not that cruel. Devers said seriously, in my eyes, there is no difference between Brudi, Lucanians, and Greeks. Sidorum stared at him in disbelief. You might ask, if this is the case, why attack Brudi? Devers sighed, pulled up a weed with his right hand, and twirled it around his finger. For 100 years, Brudi and Greeks have regarded each other as enemies, killing each other endlessly. If the Brudi tribal alliance is established, the conflict with the Greeks will only intensify. Dionia had no choice but to attack first, not to destroy Brudi, but to bring Brudi into Dionia alliance and become a part of it. The Mediterranean Sea is big enough for us Greeks and Brudi to explore, plant, and graze. Why should we fight to the death for such a small piece of barren land? Sidorum was silent for a long time, and tentatively whispered in a low voice, You want the tribes of Brudi to become Dionia's alliance. Dionia has paid a huge price and sacrificed so many lives just to make Brudi an ally. Devers's expression changed, and his voice suddenly became heavier. The people of Dionia will not agree, and neither will the Senate. Do you want us to be like the Lucanians in Nudum? Sidorum said bitterly. Vigo City was not far from Nudum, so he knew the situation there. Brudi will be incorporated into Dionia, Brudi will become Dionia citizens, and the tribal leaders will still be in charge of their own tribes, but the managers of towns such as Vigo, Cosenza, Nepetia, and Ambalia will be appointed by Dionia Senate. Abyssinia has agreed to join Dionia alliance, and Bagalipi and Brim will also become members of Dionia's Senate. You can go to Brim for further information. Devers' words made Sidorum's heart waver a little, but he still asked unwillingly, Can't we manage our own towns? The Brudi are not used to being commanded by outsiders. I'm afraid there will be trouble. Devers said firmly, All the territories of Dionia must be governed by the Senate, and this will never change. However, if you join the Senate, one day you will also be elected by the Senate as the governor of Cosenza, or even the governor of the entire Brudi region. Dyphus's flattery lessened Sidorum's resistance. He thought for a while and said helplessly, I'm just the leader of Vigor City. It's okay, you just need to decide the ownership of Vigo City. Devers saw him still looking down and hesitating, so he said, Go and think about it, don't rush to make a decision. Sidorum answered in a hurry and was about to leave absent-mindedly. Please wait, there's one more thing I need your help with. Devers's words made Sidorum panic. He staggered a few steps and almost fell. Please go and comfort the captured Briti warriors. Tell them, as long as they do what we ask, the soldiers of Dionia will not hurt them, and they will be able to go home safely after some time. However, if they gather to cause trouble and try to escape, our soldiers will not be lenient. Moreover, when the Briti belong to Dionia in the future, their families will also be punished. Devers said sternly. I'll go and tell them. Sidorum looked gloomy, and the wrinkles on his face deepened. After the conversation with Devers, he seemed to have aged a few years. Looking at the unsteady Sidorum being escorted away by the soldiers, Marcius asked, Sir, will this old man surrender? Devers smiled. Him agreeing to my request just now is a good start. However, if he doesn't hurry up, we won't need him when the time comes. The siege of Canopiscia had reached its most critical moment. The city walls had become dilapidated after days of attacks from the ballistae, and many of the trenches had been filled up. The soldiers defending the city were attacked by the ballistae and archers on top of the siege towers, causing many casualties. Legio III had also paid a price. 5 ballistae were damaged due to the long period of wear and tear, and 2 of the construction towers were destroyed due to the British fire attack. More than 400 soldiers were killed or injured, most of them were archers. However, Helos still maintained the high-intensity attack on Canopiscia every day. He still remembered the orders given to him by Devers. Now in the Mediterranean Sea, whether it's the Greek city-states or other countries, siege is a huge problem. I hope that after you go to Canopiscia, don't be afraid of the difficulties and casualties of the soldiers. You must take that stone city and summarize a set of siege experience for Dionia. In the morning, the soldiers of Legio IV and Trine lined up 200 meters south of Canopiscia. In front of the huge army were 5 ballistae and 3 siege towers. The requirements to build ballistae were very high, and the key components were very delicate, especially the spring set. The Mathematics Research Institute spent a lot of time and money to build 10 ballistae, and it was not something that could be repaired by engineers in a few days. However, although the siege towers were large, as long as there were enough people, it was not difficult to build. The physically and mentally exhausted Canopiscia soldiers had never seen so many enemies below the city walls, and they could not help but feel a chill down their spine. The crows that had been circling in the air, looking for rotten corpses, also seemed to sense the danger. They cawed and flew away. Legion Commander, everything is ready. When Helos heard the report, he immediately said, Ballistae! Ballistae ready! The captain ordered. The axle turned, the bowstring was pulled, the stone bullets were placed into the chute, the angle and range were set, fire. 5 live bullets flew out with a strong gust of wind, concentrated on the most broken section of the city wall, and opened the prelude to the siege. Then came the second round, the third round. The continuous bombardment caused more and more cracks to appear on the city wall. The city wall, which had been repaired overnight, was finally unable to bear the burden. Pieces of the stone wall fell down. Finally, in the rumbling sound of crashing, the entire stone wall collapsed, and a cloud of dust rose in an instant. The Dionia soldiers cheered thunderously, while the Canopiscia soldiers sighed, and their faces were ashen. Attack! When the morale of the soldiers was high, Helos gave a timely order. Chapter 334. Pangeru's expression was grim as he looked at the incoming enemies. The fear on the faces of the soldiers around him worried him. He suddenly drew his sword and shouted, Warriors of Canopiscia, you have successfully held off the powerful enemies for nearly a month. Now the biggest test has come. Think of your parents, wives, and children. They are behind us and need our protection. Show your courage. Under the protection of Brutus, we will defeat these cowardly enemies. We, the warriors of the Briti, will never be slaves. The great leader is right. We cannot lose, we will never be slaves. We will fight the Greeks. The morale of the Canopiscia soldiers was boosted by Pangeru's encouragement. They began to draw their bows at the enemies approaching the trench. Diolidas, a member of the Council of 100 of Crotone, was the representative of Crotone. He brought several tons of grain and dozens of sheep to Trine to pay his respects to the Legio IV of Dionia in the name of the Southern Alliance. His main purpose was to observe the progress of the war between Dionia and the Bruttii. He happened to witness the siege with his own eyes. After that, he returned to Crotone and described the situation to the council with a face full of amazement. The Dionysians invented a terrifying siege weapon. They called it a ballista. It's like a bow and arrow, and it can shoot stones that weigh more than 10 kilograms a few hundred meters away, and it can accurately hit the city walls. After a few days of continuous bombardment by this new siege weapon, a large gap appeared in the stone walls of Canopetia. The Dionia also created something called the siege tower. It was like a movable wooden tower, taller than the walls of Canopetia. When the Dionia pushed it closer to Canopetia, the archers at the top of the tower kept firing arrows at the enemies on the walls. When they approached the walls, a heavy drawbridge was immediately lowered from the siege tower. The Dionia soldiers rushed to the top of Canopetia's walls through the drawbridge of the siege tower. The Dionia didn't only use ballistae and siege towers, they also used scaling ladders to scale the city walls. I saw every single one of their soldiers rushing to attack. They rarely flinched when their comrades fell off the wall. Their courage was no less than that of our Crotone citizens. However, the Nepetian warriors were not as fierce as they had been against us before. Perhaps they were too few in number, or perhaps they were intimidated by Dionia's terrifying siege weapons. In short, the battle only lasted until the afternoon. Dionia's Fourth Army attacked the city of Canopetia. Canopetia's leader, Pangeru, died in battle. When Diolidas finished speaking, the council fell silent. He had just received news that Dionia had conquered Ciudad Abyssinia not long ago, and now Nepetia had fallen. Since when did the Bruttii, who gave Crotone such a headache, become so weak? Or had the Dionia army become stronger, and the Crotone citizens could not compare to them? The people of Crotone were at a loss. When they saw the outbreak of war, they hoped that Dionia would be defeated in front of the Bruttii, so that Crotone could take advantage of them. But now it seemed that this was just Crotone's fantasy. The strength that Dionia had shown terrified the people present. This is a good thing. General Sesprotus stood up and said loudly, "The nightmare that has been troubling the people of Crotone and the other cities for hundreds of years is finally going to end. The people of Crotone will be very happy when they know about this." Sesprotus's words made those who had other ideas realize that even if they wanted to hinder Dionia, their suggestions would not be able to pass the council. At this time, Chief General Lucius stood up and said, "As a member of the Southern Alliance, we should be happy for Dionia's victory. Although Dionia did not invite Crotone to participate in the war, we are still part of the Southern Alliance. Crotone should unite with other allies to give enough military supplies to Dionia to show our support for Dionia." On the day of the Legio IV's attack, the army led by the Devers still stayed in the camp on the bank of Punate River. The soldiers were busy sending the sick and wounded back to Ciudad Abyssinia, while the supply camp transported the rations that Turii transported to Ciudad Abyssinia back to the camp. The Devers were staring at the map of the Bruttii Mountains in the military tent, thinking about their next move. At this time, Tormid came in and said, "Sir, there are a lot of Bruttii people outside the camp. The leader is called Hegesidas and wants to see you." The Devers immediately said, "Quick, let him in." It turned out that the previous riot in Cosenza was instigated by Hegesidas. As Pierre's army returned from attacking the fortress, these rebellious tribes, knowing that they were no match for the enemy, fled the city of Cosenza in a panic. At that time, Pinlan was busy dealing with the army of Dionia and did not have the energy to annihilate them. However, these tribes did not bring much food with them. They went into the mountains and suffered a lot. Not only did they suffer a lot, their food was almost exhausted in more than 2 days. Therefore, these tribes began to complain to Hegesidas and looked at him more and more unfriendly. At this time, the tribesmen who went out to gather information brought back a shocking piece of news. The Brudi Alliance and Dionia had a big battle at the Punate River. In the end, the Brudi Alliance suffered a crushing defeat. The huge army that Penland led from Cosenza was left with very few survivors. This news immediately changed the attitude of these tribes towards Hegesidas. Hegesidas made a prompt decision and led these tribes to seek refuge from the Dionysian army. The Devers did not care too much about the sudden increase of more than 2,000 mouths that consumed military rations. He was interested in Hegesidas. This was originally a move that he made on the spur of the moment. He did not expect that Hegesidas' first answer would exceed his expectations. He looked at the man who looked like a Greek, but had a different height and messy long hair. He asked curiously, "How did you convince them, Sir Archon?" Hegesidas knew that his opportunity had come. He explained in detail, before the establishment of the Brudi Alliance, the Cosenza Alliance, led by Pyrrhon, had been forcefully annexing the surrounding weak tribes. Ever since the establishment of the Brudi Alliance, in order to not arouse the resentment of the great chiefs such as Vig and Abyssinia, Penland proposed to establish an organization called the Alliance of Chiefs to gather all the chiefs who surrendered voluntarily or were forced to surrender. It was said that they would be in charge of managing and deciding the affairs of the alliance. In fact, these chiefs had no power at all. The affairs of the alliance were decided by the alliance's elders' council, which was made up of several great chiefs and high priests. The people of these tribes were completely separated and forced to form their own families. They were directly managed by the alliance. Of course, they had to pay taxes to the alliance every year. The tribal chiefs lost all their power, so of course they would not be willing. The warriors in the tribe were not used to it either. Sir, you should know that every tribe of these indigenous people basically has the same bloodline. After hundreds of years of reproduction, they are all related by blood. Usually, they will help each other if they have any difficulties. Now that they are suddenly separated from the tribe and have to live independently, the lives of many warriors are worse than before. Moreover, in the city of Cosenza, they are easily bullied by the warriors of the big tribes. Therefore, whether it is the chiefs or the warriors, of course, they will be dissatisfied. Devers listened attentively and nodded from time to time. He felt that, in fact, this set of measures of the Brudi Alliance was a step further than the original system of the Lucaria Alliance. They were preparing to completely dismantle the old tribal system and centralize the power in the upper echelons of the alliance. If they really succeeded, they would become a great enemy of Dionia. Sir, in order to protect the Shilu tribe, you did not hesitate to start a war with the Brudi Alliance. Hephaestus flattered Devers a little and continued, in order to fight, the Brudi Alliance had to suspend the punishment of the tribes that surrendered later. Therefore, after I sneaked into Cosenza, I told them, Dionia will defeat the Brudi Alliance and restore the rights and freedom of your tribes. At this point, Hephaestus looked at Devers carefully. He was a little worried that his decision would be criticized by Devers. You did the right thing. Devers praised him. From the bottom of his heart, he also hoped that he could do the same as the Brudi Alliance, take away the power of each tribe and put all the Brudi directly under the rule of Dionia. However, the rational him knew that the result of such a reckless action would only intensify the conflict between the Greeks and the Brudi. It would destroy the stability of the region, and it would not be worth it for Dionia. As an organization of the same race, the Brudi Alliance was far more powerful than the other tribes. Even so, these small tribes only paid lip service to them and even rioted. If the Greeks, who had always held a grudge against the Brudi Alliance, implemented this centralization of power, it would not have a good result. Therefore, after conquering the Brudi Alliance, Devers still decided to implement the same strategy as in Lucania. On the surface, they promised the tribe privileges, but secretly exerted a subtle influence on the Briti warriors through the army and culture, and finally made them break away from the control of the tribe. Chapter 335. You mean there might be another riot in Cosenza? The Devers immediately asked. That is hard to say. After thinking for a while, Hephaestus said cautiously, I heard that in order to prevent these tribal leaders from staying in the city and causing harm to the alliance, Palin specially let them lead their former tribesmen into battle. When I brought the rebellious tribes here today, I didn't hear anything unusual in Cosenza. The Devers pondered for a moment, then said, Hephaestus, thank you very much for everything you've done for Dionia. Next time, I'll ask you about the situation in the Briti region. Don't let these tribal leaders wait outside the camp for too long. Bring them in. Hephaestus said emotionally, Sir Consul, without the protection of you and Dionia, not only would my tribesmen and I not be able to take revenge, we would have starved to death in the mountains. We are willing to do anything for Dionia. The Devers nodded emotionally, then turned around and said, Marcius, follow him to bring the tribal leaders in. Also, the Devers whispered to him, make sure to bring these people to a place where the great leader in Vigo City can see them. Sidorum was surprised to see the tribal leaders who were supposed to be in Cosenza City in the Dionia military camp. One could imagine how shocked he was. The Devers warmly received the anxious Briti tribal leaders and solemnly promised them that as long as they joined Dionia, not only would Dionia not interfere with their management of their tribes, but they would also have priority in choosing good settlements and pastures. The Devers even opened the map of Dionia and told them that not only could they choose the Briti region, but they could also choose the other empty lands of the Dionia alliance. The tribal leaders were reassured and happily set up tents next to the Dionia military camp, ready to help Dionia overthrow the Briti tribal alliance that oppressed them. Only then could they get the land promised by Dionia as soon as possible. After sending them off, Divers came up with a new idea. He called Capys over and asked him to divide the 5,000 captives into 200 companies according to their tribes. The captives would then elect their own company captains, adjutants, and so on. He also asked Capys to give the newly elected company captains some prestige among the captives under their jurisdiction, as long as the captives did not run away or resist. For example, they would be given the right to distribute food, the right to distribute labor, and the right to punish their subordinates. In the Devers plan, Turii would be the center of the city-state alliance of Dionia in the future. The Briti region, which was very close to Turii, should become a core area of Dionia. However, the Devers were very clear that the biggest difference between the Briti and the Lucanians was that there were no large tribes in Lucania municipality within the territory of Dionia. According to the current development of the situation, there were likely to be several large Briti tribes when they conquered the Briti region. They would be an unstable factor when Dionia ruled the Briti region in the future, and it would also increase the difficulty of governance in the Briti region. The main strategy of the Devers was to dismember it and make it bigger and smaller. The method of these 5,000 captives was to prepare in advance. Just as the Devers had begun to prepare for the conquest of the Briti region, the city of Cosenza was not as normal as Hephaestus had said. Instead, it was full of treacherous changes. Cadarc, the leader of Cosenza, originally had the same strength as Petaru's tribe. However, ever since Petaru became the son-in-law of Pinlan, the situation changed. In the process of incorporating and annexing small tribes, the Petaru tribe, which had the support of Piran, gained many benefits. The tribe's strength expanded rapidly. Not only did it quickly become the second largest tribe in Cosenza and even the entire Briti region, but under the guidance of Pinlan, Petaru also entered the highest authority of the newly established Briti Tribal Alliance, the 7-member Elders' Council. In this regard, Cadarc was angry and dissatisfied with the unfairness of Petaru. However, the strength of Petaru and Petaru's tribe forced him to put on a smiling face and listen obediently. For example, this time, Penland led the largest army in the history of the Briti to fight against the Dionia, but he was asked to stay behind to guard the city of Cosenza. He had no choice but to accept it. Even if he became the temporary master of Cosenza, Kaderk did not have absolute power because he knew that the high priest Ferodaru, whom he secretly mocked as Perrin's dog, was watching him closely. If he made a move, Ferodaru could make half of the 2,000 warriors under his command disobey his command. Of course, the other half were his tribesmen. With the army out, the city of Cosenza was mostly empty. Naturally, there was less work to be done. Kaderk was bored and stayed in the Alliance meeting hall in the inner city for half a day until the guards came to report that the Briti Alliance had been defeated and the defeated soldiers were gradually entering the city. Although they had discussed the possibility of defeat before the battle, Kaderk was still shocked when he heard the news. He quickly rushed to the east gate of the outer city. The scene in front of him was unbelievable. Outside the gate, there was a crowd of exhausted and disheveled defeated soldiers. They had lost their helmets, shields, and spears. Some of them were even naked and covered in mud. They were scrambling to enter the city. At the slightest movement, they panicked and pushed each other crazily. Some of them were even pushed down the moat, screaming in pain. Once they entered the city, they immediately lay down on the ground and soon fell asleep. Kaderk had been on the battlefield for a long time and had suffered some defeats, but he had never seen such a scene. He could not help but be shocked. He immediately mobilized his troops to maintain order at the gate and rescue the wounded soldiers. Not long after, he saw Penland. The great leader of Cosenza was no longer in high spirit. His eyes were lifeless and his expression was dull. He hugged the neck of the horse tightly. The war horse was obviously exhausted. It moved forward little by little, and every step was difficult. Suddenly, it knelt on all fours, and Penland, who was caught off guard, fell to the ground. The accompanying guards quickly went up to help him up. Penland, who had been on the back of the horse for more than an hour, was also physically and mentally exhausted. He could barely stand with the help of the guards. When he saw Kaderk, he said weakly, be careful of the enemy's ambush." Then, he was carried into the city by the guard. Seeing Penland in such a sorry state, Kaderk's anxious heart was inexplicably filled with a sense of schadenfreude. This feeling reached its peak when he saw Petteru. Petteru, who was 20 years younger than Penland, was much stronger than his father-in-law in terms of physical strength. However, in terms of mental strength, he was obviously frightened by the ferocious pursuit of the Dionia cavalry. When he entered the city, he lost his mind and shouted uncontrollably in front of the defeated soldiers, "The enemy will come after us! The enemy will come after us! Quickly close the gate! Quickly close the gate!" It almost caused a huge mess. Kaderk spent a lot of effort to restore order. While he was cursing Petteru for being an idiot, he was also afraid of the Dionia that he had yet to meet. That night, Kaderk maintained a high level of vigilance. The defeated soldiers escaped back to the city one after another. The people of Cosenza, who heard the bad news, cried throughout the night. The entire city of Cosenza was not peaceful the whole night. Early the next morning, there were still many defeated soldiers who escaped back to the city. In the inner city's meeting hall, Penland, who had recovered his energy and temporarily walked out of the shadow of yesterday's defeat, had a grave expression on his face. Up until now, the warriors belonging to him and the Petteru tribe that escaped back were only about 2,000. There were 700 warriors from Anbalia, about 1,000 warriors from Vigo, and the majority of warriors from other small tribes that returned were more than 4,000 people. What did this mean? It meant that the first and second largest tribes of the Briti tribe, about 8,000 people, were either killed or captured by Dionia. Such a huge number not only made him and Petteru feel extremely pained, but at the same time, it also gave the people under their command a reason to attack them, threatening their rule in the tribe. More importantly, the alliance of the Briti tribes was likely to disintegrate because Penland, who had lost his power, also lost his influence and rallying power in the alliance. Just now, the great chief of Anbalia, Bergam, rejected Penland's repeated requests to stay and led the rest of his people away from Cosenza. Although what Penland said was reasonable, the city of Anbalia is simple and can't defend against the attack of Dionia. It's better to temporarily move the Anbalia people to Cosenza and fight side by side. But, Bergam replied solemnly, the Anbalia people have lived in Anbalia for generations. They will not abandon their land. Even if they die, they will spill their blood there. The departure of the Anbalia people affected the Vigo warriors who had lost their great chief. They clamored to go home. It was not easy for Penland to convince them to stay, and he promised to do his best to save Sidorum. The problem with the Vigo warriors was only a small problem. The biggest problem was that after Penland returned to Cosenza last night, he quickly fell asleep due to the double blow of his mental and physical strength. He actually forgot to make special deployment and arrangements for the other tribal leaders who had gone out to battle. As a result, after these tribal leaders fled back to Cosenza, they did not return to their residences in the inner city, but hid in the original settlement of the tribe in the outer city. After one night, Penland realized that he had made a big mistake. He hurriedly sent a team of warriors to urge them to return.